for Infinite Plane Saturnday, November 30th, 2024. About 15 minutes late, but that should have given enough notice for people to show up and fill up the chat. Let's see who's here. P. Trippa, the only one in the raft at the moment. Okay, here we go. The Odyssey was lagging, and I use Odyssey for the radio streams. So we're on TuneIn, we're on radio.net, we're on paranormal.radio, where Infinite Plane Radio was ranked 13 out of, I think it was like a top 20, or no, maybe it was top 13 paranormal. And we're not even paranormal, and we're considered paranormal. But you can find all of the links to the various audio streams to listen at ips.monster. And let me go ahead and update the titles. It's always slow. Today is Infinite Plane Saturnday. Why do we do that? Just to emphasize the point that we know that the cult that runs the world is obsessed with astrology. J.P. Morgan said that millionaires don't care about astrology, but billionaires do. And it's true. And astrotheology. And the Lima Gnostic Catholic masses, disguised as Super Bowl halftime shows. They're into a lot of things. They worship burning obelisks, which go up into their fake space heaven. And speaking of that, even if the flat Earth contingent and the globe Earth contingent go down to Antarctica in a couple of weeks, and they see a 24-hour sun, it doesn't make space travel real. So we can't fall into that trap. We're still looking at the fakery and where it augments what is real. And their entire worldview is based on us not acknowledging or noticing special effects. And that's minimized. And that's something that they don't talk about. It's very suspicious. It is suspicious to me. Like, I get it, McToon. They live in the Matrix. But someone like Witsit Gets It, who's going down, he's going on the Penguin Tour with these guys. He never talks about special effects in these debates. He keeps it to his side, which is mostly pseudoscientific or unverifiable. And also somewhat, I guess he has a biblical take. I don't know, is he a domer? Regardless, that's going to come to a conclusion here very soon. And I look forward to it. Copaesthetics is destroying and shifting paradigms one auto hoax at a time. Yeah, the paradigm's not going to shift itself. Okay, joined by JC, Observing Reality, Josh Lebsock, Jay Nelson, Ears Up, King Ravana, Mongo Z, Chuck Us a Spanner. Yeah, if you want a spanner, the quickest way is to just leave a comment below the video. From there, I go into the comment section on my end, and I can just hit wrench. And if you don't know the history of the wrench, the IPS is going to be producing a documentary. I had to, like a sort of a to Z called The Auto Hoaxer, which we're working on. And we'll get into the background of what the wrench is, why we needed it. How you can't really have a think tank without some standards. Ted Stryker, good to be here. Thirst for Truth. Matt X, Diana South from D-Live. The Frugal Snowboard, make auto-hoaxing great again. Well, it was never not great. It was always fringed and minimized. I mean, I was called out by, I think is it Joseph Watson from InfoWars? Paul Joseph Watson. And Paul Joseph Watson was covering the story of the truck attack in Nice, where the truck was running over this Christmas parade or something. And they were dumping simulation training dolls out the back of a U-Haul. And someone with a blurry cell phone ran by. You couldn't really see anything, but it was obviously a bunch of dolls. And I was calling it out, and many others were. And Paul Joseph Watson said, auto hoaxers, get out. And he just started banning us, one after another. And one person said to me in my own live stream, he said, that was my girlfriend that you were just saying was fake. And I'm like, wait, you're on a live stream with like 30 people talking about how this is a simulated event and you're not at the bedside of your girlfriend who just got ran over by a truck? Or is your girlfriend a simulation training doll? But at the time, you had a bunch of plants who were there to reinforce the simulations. They would be in the chat rooms trying to guilt trip you into not seeing what you're seeing. And we set up this standard of auto hoaxer GTFO. Every person at the wrench is a moderator. And we filtered out the people who are likely trolls, plants, or just do-gooders A lot of people lie on behalf of Big Brother because they think they're doing the right thing. They think they're doing good. They have good intentions. There were no planes, says good evening. Great username. Joined by Osher06. No, P. Tripper, you were the first one in the raft, and then I had to refresh. There was actually a whole lot of people. And the raft, of course, is what you call a group of penguins out on the water. They raft up. And we are floating atop the sea of irrelevance. And it's bad. X, Twitter, it is terrible. I spent too much time today flagging accounts. And when I flag somebody's account, I will screen cap it and send it to them so they know. And I can't be quality control. This has got to be outsourced. But the quality versus quantity, no, it's honestly, X is a mess. It's been mud flooded with bad memes. And the people who seem to be the most rewarded on that site are the ones who spam the most. Just a bunch of alt-right S posters, QAnon spammers, and I don't know. It's not organic anymore. You call it the commons. It's certainly not fulfilling that. And, it is interesting too, and I have something to this, having to do with Elon Musk. Again, he's big in the news, but for some time I've been talking about his dual roles of destroying the cyberspace and outer space, low Earth orbit. And right now, there's an article here that says, are space activities endangering the Earth's upper atmosphere? Over the past decade, space has become increasingly cluttered with a growing number of spacecraft being sent into orbit. As these eventually disintegrate, they release polluting emissions that risk harming the upper atmosphere. So there's that. And then, a separate story, there's the Kessler syndrome, where the satellites impact each other and small bits of debris break up. For example, Chinese rocket breaks apart in low Earth orbit, creating a cloud of space debris. Now, if you remember, Megalopolis has as one of its main plot points an old Russian satellite exploding, or rather falling to Earth, destroying New York. But interestingly, as it was in the film festivals, an old Russian satellite exploded in space into 100 pieces, necessitating a lockdown on the ISS. So this is a growing story. But I am increasingly seeing mentions of Elon Musk's role in potentially causing the Kessler syndrome. This avalanche in low Earth orbit, where the end result of it is outer space would not be accessible for a couple of generations. So here's the storyline here. Satellites about to fall. I'm just going to play a few clips. But what I'm pointing out here is that Musk in particular is singled out. And he has been blocked from launching sites in California based on its online content. So I've been making this correlation between space junk and mind junk, and the parallel of the cyberspace, which accesses our mind space, and outer space. And as I've been saying, outer space is really just a metaphor for your space between your ears. So let's go ahead and play this really quick.
Kessler syndrome is a chain reaction of collisions among space debris that, once it sets in, might leave orbits entirely unusable. In the past years, we've seen an increasing number of satellites breaking up and near collisions with space debris. So how close are we to the Kessler syndrome? The Kessler syndrome was conjectured in 1978 by NASA scientist Donald Kessler, astronomer.
Okay, so essentially it's about the collision and how unstoppable it would be. And then, of course, this article goes into essentially suggesting that Musk, with his 42,000 satellites in low Earth orbit, might actually be the thing that ruins space for everybody for generations.
And projected it into the future. For this, they assumed that the current launch rate of about 1,500 satellites per year remains stable. They find that runaway debris growth would begin around the year 2050. The projection sensitively depends.
Anyway, I have a link to it, but I'm bringing this up because we're going to see this story emerging, and it's not a coincidence. Someone here, who was it? Norba LA says, I don't like this woman, but also says nuclear weapons are real. If you believe in nuclear weapons, do you have a bunker? Do you have a backup plan? Do you have a mask? Do you have a radiation first aid kit? Like, are you even prepared? You can get those from Laura Loomer, actually. Laura Loomer sells dog food that she's comfortable eating and radiation first aid kits. Also, do you do duck and cover drills? Do you ever duck and cover? Like, I'm genuinely curious. If you believe in nuclear weapons, do you ever practice ducking and covering? Groveling beneath your bed or something? Very curious. Because I don't believe in them. But it's going to be the next excuse I think they're going to use for locking everybody down. All right, let's continue here. Mango Penguins, Joe Santo, thank you for joining. Okay, we have a great number here. We're already past 80, and that's just on video. Joe Santo says, I was enjoying my space experience. Yeah, this is probably a build-up towards some kind of space environmentalism where they're going to make the case that we need global regulation of outer space. That's one of the main uses here. The global threats, the universal threats. And space junk means that one billionaire in America, the richest man, gets to ruin space for everybody. Just as the richest man in America, in the world, gets to ruin cyberspace for everybody, insofar as X is the vector for the mind viruses that bring about the destruction of our civilization. And that's pretty much what they're saying, which is why I call it Disease X. Norva says bunkers are useless in a nuclear winter. Yeah, well, I think they're fake. And if you think they're real, I'm just wondering what precautions you have taken. Like, do you have a mask? And people who believe in space junk, how do you sleep without a helmet on? Because that is a threat. It could conceivably hit your house if you believe in it. And I don't. I'm just wondering, if you claim to believe in something, you should have some kind of commensurate contingency for that thing that might occur. But no, space junk is fake. It's also part of this narrative of capitalism causing pollution. The connection here you have to make, though, with Musk is capitalism. The richest man in the world, capitalist, ruining the collective. The individual is the primary threat. And this is where we get into the realm of mind viruses and the isolated thought crime carried by individuals. And do we have the right, or does the state have a compelling interest in quarantining those who would spread dangerous mind viruses? And we're at that place right now. Alex Jones has played his role in setting the stage for this next era. And this isn't going to be like strong arm imposed censorship, burning books. No, this is going to be a complicit public saying, please censor the internet. Please censor it. We need this. We need to lock down the internet until we get all these mind viruses out, because we cannot critically think about things and refuse ideas. It's like, to them, to entertain an idea is to accept it. Therefore, they have to get rid of certain memes that the state deems unacceptable. That's why I say the public has mind aids by design. Okay, Diana South says, space is fake AF, destroying their old models. Yeah, again, I want to make the point that even if they go down south and they see a 24-hour sun, and it's not a fake sun like Dave Weiss suggested they might do. He said, I'm not going to Antarctica because they're going to dangle a simulation sun from a helicopter and fly around me for 24 hours. I'm like, that would be cool. Like, please, I would like to go down on the Penguin tour and see a sun simulation, a whole staged event for my benefit, like I'm Truman. But no, he turned it down. But my point is, if they really see it, what are you going to think? Those of you NASA critics who don't believe what they've shown you. Well, it does not mean, therefore, that space is real as presented. Up is real. Sure, the atmosphere is real. But as far as space travel, how much of that do you automatically presume to be real when we're fundamentally questioning the evidence that they have presented us, the visual evidence, the video, the obvious buffoonery on the ISS, a 24-year blooper reel? Yeah, Glenn Clark, there's lots of new videos, UFO vids being uploaded. Project Bluebeam, yeah, probably. And I saw this really notable one here where it appeared to be a UFO landing somewhere in New York, and everybody around was running from it. However, the key point here is it wasn't an effective hologram that had people running. It was augmented virtual reality. Nobody there actually saw it. So, in other words, only the people who saw the video actually see the flying saucer, but the people who were there reacting to it were merely LARPing. And it was actually put up there by Lil Uzi Vert, which is interesting for its own reasons. But let's go ahead and show you this. A rapper, Lil Uzi Vert, took an album promotion to a new level in New York City, creating a buzz with what appeared to be an alien spaceship hovering over the Big Apple, likely powered by hologram technology. Notice how credulous these people are, and these are all huge accounts. So their automatic assumption is hologram technology. The spectacle featured him dramatically descending from the spaceship, sparking panic among New Yorkers. Imagine the kind of technology the government possesses. So now let's look at the footage here. And there are people here, just so you know the reactions. Wow, if this is what the rapper can do, imagine the secret technology the government has. They can convince us there's an alien invasion. Veil of Vibration says, yeah, they can fool people who knew Project Bluebeam is a thing. So both of them are conjecturing that the technology is at the point where they can really fool people. And here's the video. And you'll see people running around.
What the fuck? What is that?
Now, if you take this video at face value, you think that they're all reacting to something that they all see. But this is the illusion. The illusion is these are all crisis actors pretending to see it, but it's only visible through their phones. But as part of the promotion, they're acting like it's really there. And we've often described the scenario of fake nukes and fake UFOs, how they would present these things. And I said this is precisely what they'll do. They will create the effect with augmented virtual reality, and all of the supposed eyewitnesses will be actors. And those of us who are getting the information secondhand would have no way to know. So in this case, you have a convincing video of a group of people in New York panicking at the sight of this big UFO where little Uzi Vert is descending. But in reality, nobody sees anything. Interesting trick here. But most people in the comment section think it's real. One person finally debunked it. He said, just bad video effects on mobile phone footage. How come there aren't other mobile camera clips? That's a good point. You should always look for another camera view. I called this out the other day. I saw this fake UFO, and it was a gnat in front of a flashlight. But from the camera's perspective, it looked like a UFO flying around in the sky. And the person who was uploading it was shining a laser pointer into the sky on the gnat, and then it would flash, or rather it would reflect. And the video was described as a UFO interacting with a laser pen. The truth of it is, it was a gnat. But you wouldn't have known if you didn't watch the full video and catch it at the very edge. But my point being, two cameras recording something high up in the stratosphere should show the same footage. And in this case, a second camera would have revealed it was a gnat or a firefly. In this case, yeah, the lack of secondary footage, that's a giveaway. Bad visual effect composite, not real, didn't happen. Don't fall into delusion through bad CGI. Too late. I mean, people will see through this, but they're not going to see through the ISS. Pretty good, though, as far as the special effect goes. And it likely fooled 90% of the people. I just have my BS detectors on, and the visual illiteracy is the main thing that we talk about today, and how essentially there isn't any. You can't tell real from fake. All right, let's see here. Tomanoid says, not to mention the Diablo 4 charts, Elon Musk became #1 Diablo 4 player in the world. Yeah, why is he so inescapable? There's no Elon, Elon fatigue. I mean, there's Trump fatigue. I experienced that, but it's like Elon never goes away. And by the way, he says something, he and Rogan have been, there's a few people, we'll get to this. He said something very peculiar the other day. He was hanging out with Sylvester Stallone, who we were just talking about. And we had mentioned how Stallone was an actor in a movie called Demolition Man, which featured predictive programming for 2020. And Musk is hanging out at Mar-a-Lago. Stallone's there. And he's there talking to him about how he was in a science fiction movie that predicted the future. He actually alluded to what we were talking about, which was kind of interesting. I'll pull that up. But as a rule, anybody who shows up in the body of predictive programming is likely an insider as far as some level of awareness about the entrainment of entertainment and future fake news. So here's Musk saying to Stallone, I was telling the Sly Stallone that I just watched Demolition Man again and how well it predicted the crazy woke future 30 years ago. Now, remember, Musk himself was a character, I think, mostly created by Werner von Braun as the one who colonizes Mars, who they call the Elon. And he's an amalgamation of von Braun, Tony Stark, Iron Man, Gene Wilder. I think you could add Pope Constantine and a bit of Henry Ford, but he's a Frankenstein. Lucid Streams, just saw your paintings on your IG account. Oh yes, I'm back to selling art on eBay. I should promote it, but I don't do anything related to what we talk about, and I think I should. I've considered it before. Like, for example, commission a crisis actor. I'll paint one. Joined by Mudflood Society says, what's the deal with the alien invasion? They're setting the stage for December. Okay, here's something. The QAnoners, I hear the word on Q Street. I have my spies. I promise I don't go there. I'm not a secret hopium addict. I'm not going for Mentanol in between live streams. But I do pay attention to Q Street. I'm just not believing any of it. And they claim that there was a supercomputer in 2009 that predicted that if Donald Trump ever went on Joe Rogan's podcast, the aliens would show up 39 days later. Now, as dumb as this sounds, this is mega viral right now because the countdown started, and on December the 3rd, the prophecy of the supercomputer is expected to come true, and we're supposed to see aliens, UFOs, fighting in the sky. Something to look forward to. Joined by Esteban, says hello at IPS and friends. Moore says Bluebeam was used a long time ago on 9/11. It depends on how you look at Bluebeam. You know, I kind of look at it as projecting hyperstitions onto the collective psyche. It has nothing to do with holograms in the sky. They can invent something out of whole cloth, project it onto the TV screen, and then it's in our minds. So to me, Project Bluebeam is an ongoing operation that never stops. And if you're not consciously and deliberately refuting them, you absorb them. Joined by Patricia Steer from Twitter. Okay, let's see the numbers on Twitter, by the way. It's called IPS Think Tank. There are 35 listening there. And all of the live streams and videos go out in the archives, but they're automatically recorded on X. So if you follow me on X, IPS Think Tank, it's an easy place to get the archives. You know, I describe X as pretty much a mess. It's the sea of irrelevance. It's the target of so many active measures and disinformation campaigns, but it's useful. And unfortunately, it is the commons. And it's just a reflection of the world. Like, you can't run to Blue Sky and get the content that you need. So if you're there, it is kind of worth following us over there as well. I think I heard Joe Rogan say that X is the best news source in the world. And that's true and it's false. It's true in the sense that the truth is out there. It's false in the sense that it's a source. It's not a source. It's a sea of irrelevance. You have to actually go in there and source your own information, put it in your own context. The problem is the lack of context, the lack of framework, and the inability of people to tell real from fake is exacerbated by the lack of standards. I'm looking at these QAnoners who are living in these fan fiction universes where they make up the strangest things. Like right now, they're fawning over Barron Trump. It's really weird. You got thousands of people fawning over Barron Trump, fantasizing that he might be the son of Princess Diana, conceived by Donald Trump, who is secretly the son of General Patton. That's insanity. It gets even worse. I was asking, I was trying to get an exhaustive list of all of the different people who've passed themselves off as JFK Jr., from Vincent Fuchsia, -48, 107, Edward X, Jesse Waters. Like, who isn't JFK Jr.? Like, that's the short. Now, here is the latest one. Matt Gaetz. Matt Gaetz, I guess because of his proximity to Trump and he has teeth. Yes, there's actually a tweet going around where they're saying that Matt Gaetz is really just a big rubber mask and it's been JFK Jr. this entire time. How does this take up any time? Like, how do people focus on this stuff? How do they even wish it to be true? I'm trying to think like a QAnoner. and they're obsessed with the number 17. And he was ordering 17-year-olds over his Venmo account, so maybe that was a hint. But anyway, it's just extremely disturbing, especially just because they don't do any kind of fact-checking of their own propositions. They imagine it, and they act as though it's true. There's no falsifiability. You could go and look at pictures of Matt Gaetz from 15 years ago, and he was not JFK. Something else, too. Matt Gaetz, interestingly enough, did grow up in the Truman Show house from the Truman Show. Norba LA said, I unfollowed Elon. You know, I've unfollowed him as well, but I can't get out of his range. He's unavoidable. Okay, I'm going through your comments here. Norba says, they'll say aliens are Chinese, mark my words. Like drones? That could be. P. Trippa says, I secretly love the alien theory, hopium. Yeah, I understand why. Because the alien, it depends on if you're left or right. I mean, this is just a generalization, but it's actually true as far as I've seen it. Because there is a schism on how aliens are viewed. There's a reason why Tucker Carlson said that an alien scratched up his back in his sleep. He said aliens are demons and they work with the government. In other words, aliens are working with the deep state, the Democrats. Aliens are demonic. And then he said he got scratched by a demon, but he also said that aliens are demons. So if you think about it, he got scratched by a demon. But this has been a growing narrative that the aliens are all evil. And yet the left doesn't believe in angels. They don't believe in God. It's an atheistic worldview. You know, scientism, nasatology. So aliens are a replacement for angels. And it offers this rapture scenario where they fix all the world's problems. But with aliens, it's technology. So it's kind of like a fantasy that everything can be fixed by a higher power, some kind of divine intervention. But they have the divine intervention myth for the left and the right. And interestingly, they're not really compatible. Because when the aliens arrive to save us with their technology, the MAGAs are going to come out with their big trucks and their shotguns, just rolling coal and shooting at the saucers, holding their Bibles, because they've been told by Tucker Carlson that aliens are demons. Tucker needs to show us his scars. Like, there should be a hashtag campaign, like, lift up your shirt, Tucker, because he said with a straight face, which tells you that he's a great liar. He said with a straight face that the aliens scratched his back and he bled. It's like, yeah, I bled. And the credulous documentarian said, wow, I believe you, and just put it in the documentary. No attempt to look at the evidence. I mean, if I was scratched by an alien or a demon, I would show it off. And I would say, hey, look, I sleep with my dogs, and I can prove to you it wasn't my dogs, because that should have been his first thing. He said he slept with 4 dogs. You need to rule out dogs before you rule in alien demons. Glenn Clark says Tucker is still CIA, or was. Well, he's a fake populist, but he's very convincing, and he's entertaining. And you know what I realize is people actually put ideology over religion, but they put entertainment value over both. They love the entertainment. Like, I'm pretty sure a lot of people who know all the news is fake went and voted for Trump because it's like their team winning. The show is that entertaining. No judgment here if you vote. But you know my perspective. I'm a conscientious objector. Joe Fiore says Tucker was talking about illegal aliens. Well, he would say it in the same breath. He would say aliens are dark. They're working with Democrats. They're demonic and they're evil. And then he would say, and these illegal aliens are coming from Africa and places far away. And they're military age men. So he would heighten the threat of aliens and aliens, which is part of the schism. This is all by design. Left, right, one is open, one is closed. One is closed borders, closed skin, the anti-vax, and then they're also about closing the Earth itself to alien invasions, thus Space Force being a right-wing thing or a Trump thing. They are consistently about closing off from government. This also pertains to the Second Amendment, because the attitudes are reversed on the other side, who are like open borders, save us aliens, and then they're porous. Their skin is porous. They're like, basically, vax me. And at the same time, they're against the Second Amendment and defending your home property. So they're completely open borders, open nation. It's a design. It's not a design flaw. It's actually the political horseshoe theory instituted as a model. And everything is perfectly split down the middle. Mind control is real. Okay, let us go take a look here. I want to catch up on my IPR points of interest. So I wrote a review. I watched a documentary, A Clockwork Shining, and I wrote a review on it because I've taken some time to study a number of sort of meta-script adjacent researchers who do seem to notice that the movies contain a lot more information than just what is on the surface, and it's beyond just the usual subtext and literary techniques, but actually pertains to the real world. In the case of Stanley Kubrick, there are a number of high-profile and very popular documentaries on the topic of, did he work with the government to fake the moon landing? Was he trying to tell us? Was he dropping hints? And when he died, just prior to Eyes Wide Shut, there was a lot of conjecture that he was trying to tell us something, to reveal something. And so this new documentary called A Clockwork Shining kind of combines the message, or the movie The Shining, with the theme of Clockwork Orange, which is mind control. And what they arrive at in this documentary is that Stanley Kubrick was trying to tell us about MK Ultra and how they create mind-controlled assassins. So I have a review on that, and I'll explain why I think it's all misdirection, that MK Ultra is fiction. Okay, satellites about to fall. We talked about that. Okay, here we go. UFO invasion predicted by supercomputer. So we only have 3 more days. 4 more days. No, 3 more days now. So the prophecy here, Trump and Rogan, 39 days to alien war.
In the vast landscape of internet lore and technological curiosity, few stories are as intriguing as that of Cliff High and his groundbreaking software, WebBot. Developed in 1997, WebBot was initially designed to analyze data from across the internet to make predictions about the stock market.
So this is Cliff High, and he uses WebBot to make other predictions outside of the stock market. And one of the predictions said that if Rogan has Donald Trump on, the aliens will invade in 39 days. This is obviously crazy, but we don't have long to wait.
Thought, the prediction indicated that a specific trigger would set these events in motion. According to WebBot, once this trigger occurred, the predicted events would transpire just 39 days later. You know, what could possibly trigger such an extraordinary series of events? The answer was as unexpected as the prediction itself. WebBot identified that the catalyst for this future confrontation would be an interview. Donald Trump would be interviewed by Joe Rogan.
So Joe Rogan interviewing Donald Trump would be the catalyst that would incite the alien invasion 39 days from that conversation, which we had. So in about 4 days, the aliens will be invading, and this is according to Cliff High's WebBot, and its prediction was made, and this was the thing that has people convinced. The prediction was made in 2009. It forecasts an epic battle in the sky involving UFOs, triggered by Joe Rogan and Trump. Here's the deal. 39 after the interview, WebBot says, quote, "We're in for a wild ride, December 3rd, 2024. Mark your calendar. Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, this prediction is too intriguing to ignore." So here we go. I'm glad they didn't bring it up like 2 years ago or last year. I'm really sick of these prophecies and having to wait. You know, just tell me like the day before. They're usually just nothing burgers anyway. King Nirvana says Dr. Ewan Cameron wasn't real. Is that one of the MK Ultra? Okay, the work of Dr. Cameron. Are you sure about that? He's listed here on Wiki. A Swiss-born psychiatrist. Now, there's this movie, I think it's Cronenberg. It's called Scanners, the one where the guy's head explodes. If you search head exploding meme, you'll know which one I'm talking about. And it has this drug called, I think it's called ephemeral, and it causes the pregnant mothers to give birth to psychic babies. And the mind control doctor who creates it is named Cameron. And it has this interesting connection to the concept of the Moonchild rituals. Crowley, L. Ron Hubbard, and Marjorie Cameron, the name again, and the idea that they're creating psychic children, that the idea of the Babylon working, generally speaking, the whole concept is to create children who are born possessed, you could say, or infused with some kind of intelligence by some non-corporeal being / angel. Joined by Thirst for Truth says, oh, thank you, 1999 super chat. Thanks for putting gas in the think tank. We couldn't move this fast without it. You know, we're 7 years in. I've been looking at some of my old videos, some of the original videos from the first channel. And once I've vetted them for stuff that will get us flagged, I'll be reposting some of these things, especially in light of what happens next month. And you'll see how we have been consistent from day one. Norbu Law says, Super OG Cronenberg. Yeah, I certainly like the organic effects, the props, the fake blood, the Heinz 57. I tend to like that more than the CGI. And I think they purposefully switched us into a CGI universe in our fiction in order to make us more susceptible to the special effects they use in the simulations. Because, you know, the hyper-realistic simulation training dolls can bleed, they breathe, they make noise. You can intubate them. So they're so realistic that they're indistinguishable from real patients. And I kind of think that what they have done is they have given us like CGI bad guys and casualties in the movies where the effects are somewhat dumbed down visually. Again, it's all part of making us susceptible to the fake news. Okay, time control. No, that's something else. Let's continue down my first list. Okay, this is something else. Joe Rogan answers a question, what is a psyop? I have a few links here where Rogan is talking about psychological operations. So here he is describing how the public's perception, the creation of Trump derangement syndrome, was the result of a coordinated psychological operation.
What you're seeing with Trump, regardless of his flaws, is a massive, concentrated psyop. They've distorted who he is to the point where most people think that way.
Now, he called it a psyop. Now, listen to his guest.
They've had narratives.
What is a psyop?
What is a psyop? Like, if you're asking what is a psyop in 2024, you're obviously in the box. You don't know. You don't know what media is, and you don't know what. I guess you wouldn't know what to contextualize it. And the problem is, truthers know what psyops are. Joe Rogan knows what a psyop is, but they don't know what psy-war is. And this is one of our main shifts, and I've been focusing my attention on this, and I've been describing it as such, that we're clear-cutting a forest of fakery as the truthers run laps around fake trees, not recognizing that the entire forest is fake. They're missing the big picture. This is psy-war. It is the rule, not the exception. It's intrinsic to what media is. The predictive programming, the concurrent programming, the perception management through psychological operations. Yeah, this is a part of what media is. These aren't anomalies, but the general public is pretty ignorant about it.
What is a psyop? I keep hearing that.
Psychological operation.
Whoa.
Where they've decided to distort people's perceptions of things.
Yeah, when you tell like an older liberal that like the Obama
Anyway, it's funny to hear someone talk about psyops not recognizing that they've bought into the entire mind war. And, you know, I don't think it's anything more than simply a frame of reference problem. And our frame of reference, to be, quote, off-world stage, you have to necessarily look at the big picture and recognize that we're only looking at a model, a version of things as Big Brother would have us believe that they are. And if you have that frame of reference, you're going to arrive at certain erroneous conclusions. So I can generally tell if somebody's in Normieville or they're not really paying attention or they're apathetic. And then you've got the wokesters and the truthers. Not hard to discern. But there's no point in trying to communicate to any area of discourse as though they're going to understand where you're coming from if you're calling out fakery or if you recognize that certain things don't exist, because they have presuppositions built into their mental landscape. So the world view is what we're always talking about. It's not about the shape of the world. It's really about the mental terrain. And the mental terrain has been augmented. It has been manipulated. I mean, you can trust them to fake the news on a daily basis, which creates fake history. So I think we can trust that they, in some way, are distorting our perception of reality. Even it could be the shape. That's why the flat earth question is so valid. They have so bent things that it might as well be flat. If they said it was flat, it could be tomorrow because the news said it. Doesn't O'Brien say that in 1984, where he's punishing Winston Smith? And yeah, here he says anything could be true. And he goes on this tear about how the public will believe whatever the party wants them to believe. And I think he even goes so far as to say, here we go. The party says the earth is flat. The party says ice is heavier than water, and trained himself in not seeing or understanding the argument that contradicted it. It was easy. It needed great powers of reasoning and improvisation. It needed a sort of athleticism of mind to make the most delicate use of logic, and the next to be most unconscious of the crudest logical errors. Stupidity was as necessary as intelligence and is difficult to attain. George Orwell, 1984. So there's a whole part of in this where he's describing how ultimately we are not only a captive audience, but we are subjective to the worldview that is presented by the power elite, who have a worldview monopoly exercised through mass media, all of it being an extension of government. I mean, is there really a difference? I think we're just governed by television sets, by screens. Kevin Mooring says, did you see the Flat Earth debate on Timcast? Yeah, I did. And it was an interesting conversation, educational. But what I want to point out here, two things. One, they don't talk about special effects. They don't talk about what that means. Like, if fake, then what? It's not even included in the discussion. So you can't really get anywhere. It's not a fair, it's not a, I would say it's not a good faith debate, that both sides are basically participating in a charade. And I was kind of surprised that Witsit Gets It has no concept of what happens if they see a 24-hour sun. Like, he hasn't thought it through. And I have. And here's what I came up with. My first thought was, you go down to Antarctica, you see a 24-hour sun, okay, then it's reasonable to think we're on a ball. However, it doesn't mean that space travel is real as presented by the space agencies, which are using special effects and fakery on a consistent basis. And we're looking at this space agency thing, as in the space program, that is, as an extension of the regular fake news. These aren't separate categories. The same people faking the psyops on the ground are faking the stuff above, and the predictive programming's aligned. I mentioned Megalopolis recently and the Russian satellite falling, and how that directly correlated with something going on in space, with the satellite breaking up. And then, moving forward, and this is just a very consistent pattern here. The movie ISS had the split between Russia and America, and Russia's nuking America, and they have to separate, rather take over. They have to take over the space station. So there's a fight. And right now, up in space, there's a leak on the cosmonaut side, and there was a point where the Americans had to put a hatch up to split them up. So there's this issue here where the Russian side could literally leak all of its air out. And I think they would all die. But my point is, we're seeing this mirroring of movies and what's happening in space all the time. It's not separate. I would say that the worldview warfare begins at the level of the big picture, and then it works its way down. Joe Santo says, we are most likely in a human farm for our free rechargeable energy and ability to work. I can't rule that out. And the more I look at the various underpinnings of the magical philosophies and their theories of mind and consciousness and energy, intention, manifestation, synchronicity, it all seems to be the case to me that if there is even a slight chance that there's a way to extract people's soul energy, they figured it out, and they're probably doing it every single day. Like, we might really be matrix batteries. But what's the alternative? Like, we've never seen it. We don't know. Maybe you might discover it on an individual basis if you unplug. But what would happen if everyone unplugged from the psyop entertainment complex? Would it have a tangible effect on the universe, on reality itself? It's an interesting concept. It goes into David Icke kind of territory, which I'm not completely subjectivist. I don't believe belief creates reality in that sense. But I think it's an interesting experiment. It's worth doing. If belief created reality, moon landings would be real. Glenn Clark says, isn't that just the loosh theory? Well, the loosh theory is kind of built upon some occult principles that had already been elucidated by like the Theosophists, the Thelemites. And if you read any of the literature, and this is pretty much across the board, cross-cultural, there is the idea that intent and focus. In fact, we were talking about this in Gilded the other day, about this universal belief in the evil eye, in unconscious emotion affecting people in negative ways, such as the envy, for example, being somehow converted into a force or some kind of effect where the target of the person with envy is somehow they become sick or something happens to them, which they attribute to the effect of this negativity and ill intent. So it's about intent and focus. And if you look at the attention economy, it seems that they're more interested in your attention than your money. I really think there's something about specifically the attention. And if you get into this, area of discourse, I think it's worth getting into because we're talking about fake news and what is our primary focus day in, day out. And it's hard not to look at the iPhone as the monolith that you saw in 2001 Space Odyssey, that this is the new Bible for all intents and purposes, that we're all being put on the same sheet, we're all being put through the same filter. It's a hoodwink for the mind. And we're all in it to some extent, unless you've opted out. But they're at the point of they're constricting it. They're shrinking the universe of ideas all the time. And I think this is Musk's job. Musk is essentially he's portrayed as a free speech kind of hero. In fact, a lot of people think he's a free speech hero, but he's like Fahrenheit 451 burning everything down. Because what X has done is it has provided the pretext for the public to agree that censorship would be in our collective best interests. Okay, moving on here. And I'll open up phones here if anybody wants to add anything. Let's continue down the list. So Joe Rogan, psyops. We did spend a lot of time talking about Mind War, the PDF by Michael Aquinos from the Temple of Set. All very interesting and relevant, because if you go by this, you could make the case that maybe we transitioned from, there's some point where things were possibly realer, and then we get transitioned into this Mind War. And the whole premise of the Mind War book, it's like a thought, is meant to provoke discussion, a thought paper, I think he called it. And the idea was, would we be better off moving us collectively into a simulation where we don't actually have to break things and kill people, where the public is put into a state of total subjectivity, and essentially we live in a simulation for all intents and purposes for our own good. But it's a world in which our minds are subject to not only a false worldview, but hyperstitions, superstitions, God constructs that keep us in line. And so I read this and it's like, this isn't just a proposition. This is how things are. But here's the forward to it, to Mind Wars, and this is kind of telling here. By Gregory C's site, this is the forward. Major psychological operations, U.S. Army, quote, the mind is its own place and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. John Milton, Paradise Lost. And that kind of encapsulates how I look at media in general. you're either mainstream and it's calm, apathetic to what you believe to be true, but calm. And then you have Woketown and you have Trutherville, where the general state of mind is agitated, activists, ready to fight, ready to run to the bunkers. So to me, it's always been the case that thank you, someone, for feeding the Krakoan. The IPS appreciates your support. So I've been making the case for some time that we shouldn't underestimate the significance of the fakery, that fakery is the main feature. And by fakery, yeah, it's fake, but it's real in the minds. And that's the point of mind war, that we accept a lot of things secondhand. And through secondhand, that kind of see-say and hearsay, we're put into a false worldview. Kevin Mooring says, Catcher in the Rye. Oh, yeah. Okay, so in that documentary, the Kubrick documentary, they bring up Catcher in the Rye. Let me go ahead and get into that review. So if you haven't seen the preview or the trailer, let me go ahead and play this. A Clockwork Shining. And this is Jay Weidner. This is the individual who did Room 237.
Some of the methods used in secret CIA mind control experiments.
There are many theories as to what The Shining is really about, from the faking of the moon landing to Native American genocide and the Holocaust.
Now, if he did fake the Apollo moon landing, then he probably has really deep connections into the intelligence world.
Okay, that's Jay Dyer. And this documentary called A Clockwork Shining is another look at The Shining through the lens of it being programming for MK Ultra mind-controlled assassins. And now let me play this, because this is kind of telling, I think. 5 days after Kubrick died, Jay Dyer seems to suggest that he channeled the real meaning to the movies.
What are you doing? And I immediately began channeling the fact that 2001 was about alchemy, actually. The moon landing. I suddenly figured it all out within 5 days of Stanley's death. I had my first two Kubrick's Odyssey movies basically channeled to me. And I swear to God, to this day, I think Kubrick's spirit was running around the world trying to find somebody who understood both alchemy and filmmaking so he could tell them about what he was really putting in his movies. And ever since then, I've been on this quest for 25 years now, trying to figure out all of Kubrick's movies. But I really do believe that we've figured out what The Shining is really about.
So what The Shining is really about, what The Shining is really about, that's the meanings to this. So I want to go over this. Review A Clockwork Shining. Jay Weidner and Ryder Lee. This builds on Room 237, in which the documentary made the case that Kubrick was involved in faking Apollo 11. So here's the first question. Stanley Kubrick, is he a whistleblower or a metascripter? Because this is the key difference here. The premise is that Stanley Kubrick is a whistleblower, and he's using his films to reveal big truths. In Clockwork Shining, they combine their conclusions from Room 237 and add a Clockwork Orange subtext of mind control and allusions to MK Ultra. So now, according to this theory, in addition to revealing his role in the faked moon landings, Kubrick is showing how the CIA created mind-controlled assassins. So you can see how this fits in to the conspiracy theories about mind-controlled assassins, which is still to this day. They say, oh, this person was mind-controlled, they were on SSRIs. It's kind of a mainstay of conspiracy thought. The false flag theory generally involves mind-controlled assassins. So it would make sense that Kubrick would have this as a subtext. The documentary features Kathy O'Brien, an author who claims to have been a victim of government mind control called Project Monarch. She claims to be a recovered multiple personality, mind-controlled sex slave who is programmed to have multiple personalities. Now here's one point. Truthers generally accept this explanation. I was looking through the reviews, and it suggested that most people who believe in MK Ultra They believe things like the Manchurian Candidate movie with Sinatra was in it, where Sinatra was a mind-controlled assassin. This is kind of like some they accept. They accept that, yes, this is likely that Stanley Kubrick was a whistleblower. And I see a lot of people spending a lot of their time and energy focusing on Kubrick as though he was trying to hint at things, like in Eyes Wide Shut, telling us about the elite. He's trying to wake people up. He's an insider. But the key point here is that mind-controlled patsies has been a red herring narrative from the start to distract you from media fakery and how psychological operations and the roles that movies play in these result in our mass conditioning for future fake news. So here's a couple of reviews just to show you where people are at. Very good information on the correlations between Kubrick's films and CIA mind control. Was Kubrick trying to alert the world to these dark government programs? Watch and find out. This documentary got into the genius of Kubrick and how MK Ultra, a government mind control project, was inserted and exposed in the movie. Now, if that's true, why did it take 50 years or whatever to get exposed? Like, it's not that obvious. But skeptical analysis that recognizes media fakery reveals the relationship between movies with predictive programming and the fake news that they are preceding. And this is where they get it wrong. What the Kubrick obsessives get wrong is they overlook predictive programming. They don't even notice it. And one feature of all of his films, but specifically The Shining, is the amount of predictive programming for 9/11. So they only see the stuff he did in reverse, like in the past. Like, oh, look, he hinted at what he did before. But we're pointing out that no, these movies are actually conveying what's going to happen in the future. And there's nothing magical about it. It's not prophecy. We've determined what they're doing here. It's a synchronization of entertainment and news for propaganda purposes. Something else they get wrong, their entire documentary is built on the premise there's such a thing as satanic ritual abuse, MK Ultra mind-controlled assassins. So unless you believe in those, I mean, maybe I could be one. I don't know. That was the idea, that they're using trauma to separate personalities that can be programmed. Unless you believe in that, this whole thing falls apart. And I don't. You know, in my opinion, if there is an explanation for MK Ultra that makes sense, it's most likely a cover story for the relationship between directors and actors in these various simulations and psyops. So you're looking at an actor playing roles, not a multiple personality Illuminati controlled slave. You see how they add a bunch of stuff onto something very basic? It's just misinformation. So in their minds, this, in addition to Apollo 11, cements Kubrick as a whistleblower, a renegade, and a truth teller. But they're wrong. Here's another reason that they are wrong. Stanley Kubrick is not the only director in whose films we find systematic implantation of predictive programming, all for the purpose of conditioning masses for future large-scale psychological operations. It's consistent. And he's not the only one. Kubrick's not the only one that we can point at. Adding to this body of programming for 9/11 in particular, there are so many directors, there are so many authors and video game makers that are included in this big picture that to only focus on Kubrick, it's myopic at this point, and it's leading to a wrong conclusion. He is but one of many metascriptors. So my overall point, my takeaway is this. It's likely that this is a limited hangout operation, that the hyper-focus on Stanley Kubrick is intentional, so that anybody noticing what we're pointing out all the time constrains their research to this one director as though he's an anomaly. It's the same thing I mentioned earlier about the tree in the forest. The truthers will focus on one fake shooting event. Meanwhile, they don't notice the next 50. And it's a totally different conclusion that you would reach if you realize that they're all fake rather than looking at it as anomalous events here and there. You reach a different conclusion because it necessarily involves an integrated effort with government, EMT, law enforcement, DHS, down to key personnel in your local media. It's a conspiracy. It might be the only real conspiracy. You could forget about 5G towers, chemtrails, and chupacabras. The only real conspiracy that we can identify that isn't manufactured fiction to distract you is what we're describing here. Metascript, the true purpose to faking the news, the manufactured history, because they're making it. We're not supposed to know we're in a vast alternate reality game, and Kubrick is just one contributor to this. So I think this Kubrick operation, this limited hangout operation, is a big distraction. And I've talked to many people who make it their work to focus exclusively on Kubrick, and all I can say is you've got the wrong paradigm. You have a filter. You have a conclusion. Everything looks like a nail when all you have is a hammer. Okay, let me continue here. Kiddo Core says, the supposed mind control typically involves hypnotism or entering some kind of hypnotic state. Yeah, I think there's something to that. There's various forms of mind control. There's the hypnosis, but there's also the limiting of options. And they can limit options by putting false explanations which constrain your own mind, ruling out possibilities before you've had a chance to assess them. So there's different ways of controlling minds that may not involve any hypnosis. A good example of this would be The Village or The Truman Show. Both movies where the people who are under mind control just don't know it. What imprisons them is their trust in lies. No need for drugs, hypnosis, or coercion. You just got to maintain the trust. Mango says, what about Loch Ness Monster, myth or manufactured? Likely a myth. I mean, I don't believe in it. I mean, you could say you believe in it, but I always make the distinction between believing and knowing. Like, you can believe in unicorns all you want. You can believe in chemtrails. That's fine. But your belief, which isn't buttressed by any real information, is just a low information belief. And that low info belief doesn't weigh as much as my informed disbelief or just skepticism in general. Anything asserted without evidence should be dismissed without evidence. I don't need to provide proof it doesn't exist. Joined by Dominic Guido. Thank you for joining. I will open up phones if anybody wants to call in. We're covering a lot of topics. I'm going to continue to go through my mind's notes. So yeah, a lot of people think Matt Gaetz is JFK Jr. It's just, there's no limit on how deranged it gets. Okay, now this is an example of how terrible things are. There are no standards. Infinite Plane Radio.
Hey, Josh Lebzak.
Hey, what's up? Thanks for calling again on this Infinite Plane Saturnday.
Thanks for taking my call. Hey, I just wanted to mention David Ewing Jr. I've listened to quite a few of his interviews and stuff, and he really points out the false history and this 19 code that goes on with history. I just wanted to know if you've heard of that.
I hadn't heard of that one in particular, but I do recall in 2020, we were noticing it was 19 years after 9/11, and it was C-19. You had the comet C-19.
19 hijackers.
19 hijackers, and we were going down the list, and we kept on finding this pattern where it seemed like the big psyops, the big generational psychological operations seemed to have the number 19 attached to them. And I asked Jordan Maxwell about this at the time, and he said it represents the end. So between 1 and 9 is the beginning and end of a cycle. So he says 19 just represents you're about to move into the next cycle.
Yeah, David talks about that, but it's supposedly it's something that's kind of like it's in the oral Quran to like look out for this number 19 as like this like a psyop code for history. And basically the Quran is saying history is fake, which I'm not a big religious guy, so I don't really get into that. But it is kind of uncanny how many, like you take someone like he has a book, Napoleon did not exist.
Yes.
And all the 19s that are associated with Napoleon are just, it's uncanny. Like how could one person have so many 19s? Like did this on the 19th, and they died on the 19th, and their war was on the 19th, and like they had 19 of this and 19 of that.
That's fascinating. We were talking about this the other day, how this idea that Napoleon was just a personification of the sun, and that he may have existed as a real person, but he was living out a historic script written in advance that was actually based on the solar myth. He was another sun king. And it's a compelling theory, and it completely comports with what we're experiencing right now with Donald Trump. And Sylvester Stallone said, Trump is a mythical character, and I like mythology. He doesn't exist. No man could do this. And I think he meant that literally, knowing we wouldn't hear it that way, but I think we are looking at, a totally fabricated character. And it's all based on, of course, this astrotheological script, the sun and the moon. Isabel Ann points out that eclipses repeat in 19-year cycles. So there's certainly something to it.
Yeah, there's something about like the 19 and the 33, there's two repeating cycles. Yeah, I'm not smart enough to like remember all this stuff, but what's interesting to me is I listen to a lot of stuff, and his stuff makes a lot of sense, but he's all talking about history, and then you're saying the exact same thing, but in the present time. So like it's that you should really check the guy out. Yeah, he's
David Ewing Jr. Yeah, I'll take a look because we're noting the different patterns. Like you can see the frequency and the consistent usage and meaning of the numbers. 19, 33, 42 is a huge one of the space program, but there's a whole list of them, and it's not this huge number that we're drawing from, but the usage is consistent. And yeah, I'm 100% making the case here that the result of fake news day by day is ultimately fake history. So we have to look at history as a construct as much as we look at our present world stage as a construct. And there's certainly a strong astrological component and basis for the big story for whatever reason.
Yeah. He doesn't really kind of give any kind of like why, because I don't think anyone can, like who can say like really, why this is all happening. But what you can say is like, look at this pattern. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. Exactly. It's like if you start with a model, then you tend to build that model and ignore what doesn't hit that exact expectation. And that's how you get stuck in a cul-de-sac. So I don't proceed with the model. I'm always like open to new information without any conclusions that might prevent me from reaching the right answers. So I don't reach for the number 33 means this, therefore these guys are doing it. I'm more like, let's just look at the pattern and see what emerges.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, thank you for the call, man. Yeah, thanks for the call, and call back anytime.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Awesome information. Josh Lobsock, thank you for calling. We've got phones open, numbers on the screen. So I was mentioning before we took the call, this is how bad the mainstream is. Like they're as bad as any S poster on Twitch. So Laura Loomer posted this at Mail Online. They're using obvious Photoshop pictures to get clicks. So this is what Laura Loomer looks like. Okay? Front view, Laura Loomer. But for months, this meme version of her has gone around where she looks like some creature. Well, the Daily Mail ran with it. They called it Mar-a-Lago face. Infinite Plane Radio.
Hey, Tim, it's Leo.
Hey, what's up, Leo? Thank you for calling.
Yeah, I hope you can hear me. I'm using a different microphone. But really interesting caller and points discussed tonight. Really with the MK Ultra angle, I had read Kathy O'Brien's book, Transformation of America, and there were a lot of uncanny details which could be verified outside of it, but still some of the elements in our story are just extremely fantastical, and like I'm not entirely sure about it. Did you ever get a chance to read that book, or have you heard of it?
Yeah, Transformation of America. I first heard of it through Adam Parfrey's Apocalypse Culture, and the thing is, there are more quote whistleblowers, survivors of monarch mind control on Twitter right now, and I call them grifters. And here's the thing I think they're doing. This is what I literally believe. They're writing, and David Icke does this too. They write really disgusting basically fan fiction about celebrities. And these are dark fantasies about how they were abused by, like one, Kathy O'Brien wrote that Sylvester Stallone had her abused by dolphins. I don't know if you've read that part. Like they're all, or Dick Cheney and how he got his name and how he, I mean, I can't even describe what he was alleged to have been doing, or how the Mexican president turned into an iguana before getting after his victims. I think it's all fiction. I think it's literally fiction, and there's no way to verify any of it. It's a huge burden of proof. Nothing's been corroborated, but I think it's ludicrous.
Well, the interesting thing is how much in her book she had talked about the fakery that was involved in the mesmerism, because she had mentioned Michael Aquino is mentioned quite a bit in that book as one of her handlers, and how she gives like a behind the scenes look at some of the techniques they would do in political negotiations, like with drug dealing in the South. One of the drug lords from South America was like a Catholic, and Michael Aquino had used Kathy O'Brien in one of his discussions with this politician by having her act possessed and have like wounds appear on her and act through his advanced what's called mesmerism techniques, and he believed it, this politician. But there's the aspects that are like verifiable or weird was she said terrible stuff about Dick Cheney, about Hillary Clinton, about Bill Clinton, Ronald Reagan, all this stuff. But one of the things that she had said is that Dick Cheney's method was the Wizard of Oz programming, he had in the Wizard of Oz, when the Wicked Witch of the West, she says like you're running out of time holding that little hourglass. You can find a picture of Dick Cheney at his desk with a little hourglass on his desk, and I know where did Dick Cheney get his nickname from. It's pretty vile and gross, right? But there was an image that had leaked of him, sitting outside that you could see through his pants. I was like, in sexual abuse cases, when they ask people, like, can you verify parts of the private parts of your attacker, that's used as evidence in court. And Kathy O'Brien like talked about very specific things about it, which if you do some research, you could find you're like, that's like weirdly verifiable, right? So there are some detail. I don't know. It's usually, how the best liars mix truth with lies, right?
Okay. What about the premise that most people, unlike her, don't awaken from it, but that the trauma creates walls between what they experience so they don't remember it, and that this compartmentalization of the mind allows them to become perfect recorders, and they can perfectly recall everything, and they can be used, like the idea that they're like a human tape recorder at that point. Like a lot of this to me just sounds like fantasy and myth. Like I don't believe that MK Ultra exists the way that Fritz Meyer in his book How to Create an Undetectable Mind-Controlled Slave describes it. I think there are many inconsistencies, but I think it's mostly fiction. I don't believe it.
And the reason why I have now recently come to really question it is because of predictive programming. And by the way, that personality type is called a carrier pigeon, the kind where they partition parts of the brain and then they just become a human tape recorder to bring messages. So that's bypass all forms of...
Let me ask you a question on this, because let's say you have somebody going deep undercover, and you can find instances of musicians, people travel being useful as spies. And so these celebrities are being used as spies, and they do convey information to people in key places. Let's say that's happening. What better way to cover it up than to suggest that the celebrities are MK Ultra mind control victims? And, it's like you add a bunch of misinformation to what might actually be a real phenomenon, but you wouldn't need to do some kind of dissociative identity disorder trauma mind control to get somebody to do basic spycraft. And you're talking about multiple personalities. It could just be actors playing roles. The CIA has long used deep fakery. So it's not just the mask, it's the personality, it's the backstory. So you do have fake people. So I don't think we need to introduce the MK Ultra storyline when it's really just likely a cover for spycraft.
That's exactly what I was going to say, is that a lot of the things that are described are plausible and probably even real, except for the human puppet, full-on partitioned brain. Let me swift your personalities like channels on a TV to have you do that. I mean, You know what I mean? That's the fantastical element that adds the MSM plus scare factor to this horrific, thing that's happening anyway. Do drug deals happen with illegal drug deals with politicians in South America with coercion, with scare tactics? Yeah, probably. No, not probably. It definitely happens, right? But does it have to involve full on personalized satanic ritual abuse? I'm not entirely sure. And if they ever do those things like that, I think it's a display, like a show.
I don't even.
They probably.
I don't even know if that would be done. I've been looking into this even closer, and what I have found, there's an entire genre of fiction, and they have Substacks now, where supposed survivors of ritual abuse will write these long, detailed descriptions, and honestly, it should be classified as adult erotica, with these elements that are considered to be, I don't know if they're bannable, but like really gross themes involving inappropriate ages and stuff. So I'm just saying that these people are writing some sick trash. Like one person wrote about how Bernie Sanders supposedly was abusing people and throwing them off a helicopter, and they were initiating people into the club. And I'm like, how can you just be so loose with the names of celebrities and accuse them of being involved in snuff films and killing children? And they're doing it with the full credulity of their believers. And they're claiming they witnessed it, but they were mind controlled, so they didn't remember it until just now when they opened up their monetized Substack account. And I thought I could make up some stories quite easily, but it just seems to me like it's fiction. Yeah. It's pretty sick. And I call them out on it, and I get blocked by a lot of these people. And one of them accused me of being a satanic ritual abuser because I called her a grifter. And it's like, you're obviously making this up. Bernie Sanders could not have done this. And they're grifters. I'm sorry, but it's like, it's an operation. And I think it's a disinfo campaign, a moral panic, and it's targeting the right and conspiracy theorists in particular.
I just would caution you against completely discounting something based off of grifters existing on a subject, or them saying you're a satanic ritual, and saying, okay, there's no way this exists at all because there's controlled opposition. But the thing that's so crazy is Kathy O'Brien in that book, she talks about how Dick Cheney was into, the most dangerous game, like human hunting and stuff like that. And this book was written in the early 90s. I don't know if you remember, but there was a long time during, I think, George W. Bush's presidency, on Daily Show, they had this big gag where it's like, oh, Dick Cheney shot a man in the face. And they made it such a big joke. It percolated. It was on, this is like, early internet TV days, and that joke circulated everywhere. But the book was written way before that joke percolated in the mainstream. And I'm wondering, was that like a continuation of the meta script? So it's like, early on, when people read this book, they're like, oh my gosh, Dick Cheney's is like horrific, person hunter. You know what I mean? Most dangerous game hunting. And then on a comedy show, they make jokes about it.
Well, another thing too, though, it reminds me of Q, how you have the same accusations, the same stories, blood drinking, adrenochrome, all the celebrities are cannibals and baby eaters. It's the same old story. There's nothing new added to it, and no evidence has ever surfaced to support any of it. And when I look at this, I'm thinking, there were, like Kevin Mooring asked, did they ever find the Maui school children that were missing? This is conspiracy lore that there were 1,500 missing children. Well, there were no missing children. These are moral panics. And I would say that this falls into the category of moral panic. There's no evidence for it. It's partisan. It serves the right-wing Christian agenda. There's no way there's any truth to it. And then one other point, and this is a big one for me with the whole Q movement, is like, oh, we've identified the guys, the people who do this bad stuff. And I'm like, if you look at the prison system and look at who's in prison for what, you'll find that evil is equally distributed on all socioeconomic strata. It's not just the elite. And your local prisons aren't full of elitists abusing people, children. It's normies, and it's sick. So I think it's kind of a fantasy.
Evil. Yeah, so like evil is not dependent on socioeconomic status, but the theory is that the people at the top, the elites who have, who basically run everything, they'd be able to express that in the most unfettered ways possible. But the thing that made me question Kathy O'Brien is because you talked about a Clockwork Shining today, is I had noticed it was a couple of years ago, I forgot the name of the documentary, but she was in a documentary about the book, about, Transformation of America, her recounting it. And at the end, she casually mentions, and Donald Trump's really been against human trafficking. That's when I was like, oh, okay, all right, that's when I was like, all right. And now she's in this documentary. It was A Clockwork Shining. Which is another controlled opposition documentary, not talking about media fakery, not talking about the metascript.
Yeah, let me add on to this, because Kathy O'Brien said one thing that was useful in the documentary. She said that they're using movies to implant traumatic memories into our collective psyche, that they're implanting false memories. So she's correct that, yeah, they are implanting false memories for the purposes of coercion. It is, in fact, a form of terrorism. It is, in fact, mind control. But they're not really killing people. That's what is being missed here, is that the implantation of traumatic memories isn't because they're really killing people, and it's more like, I guess her point and their point is to kind of guardrail this fact, because in their worldview, all these things are real. The bad guys are really doing this stuff, but I don't know. I kind of just think,
and there's a deep state to fight against, and all these kinds of things that can be extracted. And that's part of the big narrative, is that there's a deep state, and once we get rid of that, we're smooth sailing.
Wait, how is Trump? And how does Trump have the reputation of being against human trafficking? You have Trump, Mr. Grab 'em because I'm a star. He has the beauty pageants, and there's a lot of talk about
beauty pageants. Exactly.
So if you look at his past, how many times he's been married, all the things he's accused of, credibly. It's hard for me to say, oh, he's against human trafficking. And then he gets the support of this whole Sound of Freedom movie and that whole movement to save the children, Tim Ballard, who's now being charged with human trafficking. So the idea that Trump is a savior is pure Q fantasy at this point. He's
and again, you bring up Sound of Freedom. I need to write a review on it, which, by the way, I don't want to advertise my site. If you go mindwar.page, I'm starting up this site where I'm going to be writing these breakdowns of films. But in Sound of Freedom, if you recall, there was a wealthy Colombian millionaire, like the wealthiest man in Colombia, who helped them in their drug sting. I'm sorry, in their child trafficking sting, by like donating his like island or something where they did that big sting operation. It was so obvious the first time I was watching. I'm like, this is a Trump proxy. Like, this is a subconscious association to the audiences of who Donald Trump is. Even though Donald Trump's never mentioned once in the film, it's obvious, like, here's a guy, he's bad, he's done some really bad stuff in his life, but he wants to do good with his money, and he wants to help fight this evil, these cockroaches in our society and stuff. That's a narrative I'm seeing play out so often in any of these films that have subconscious associations with Trump. Even, I guess, last weekend I saw Black Klansman by Spike Lee. And in that film, they have Alec Baldwin play this for an intro to give shocking imagery of the racist, terrible, bad side of Trump. But then Adam Driver's character is like the good side of Trump, where it's like, yeah, I'm privileged. Yeah, I have all this, but I can also do good with my privilege and money. That's like a recurring theme I notice in those films.
I see. So he's got I guess, kind of a character arc where he redeems himself. Hey, I got to ask a question of Kevin Mooring. Were you unironically asking about the missing Maui children? Because if anybody here thinks that there were 1,500 kids who were zapped by direct energy weapons in Maui, you're firmly implanted in Trutherville. This is, we need to get away from their fake death tolls. Like, one of the points that I've been making, and I think you might agree with this, is that our starting point for assessing any news story with a death toll is 0 if there's no evidence. And if there's indications of any kind of hoaxery, including predictive programming. 0 should be our starting point. We don't start at their big numbers.
Yeah, because once you have fakery, then it means it's a stage production. And how many people die in stage productions or in movies? It's like, I tell people, it's like, no one died in 9/11. I say, yeah, how many people died in the moon landing? Even according to the official narrative, right? I guess maybe the training going up to it, people may have died in it.
Maybe,
but that's like the actual thing.
The 3 guys in Apollo 1, which I happen to think is a hoax, because if you look at the date of the Apollo 1 incineration, it was 19 years, so that number again, 19 years until the Challenger disaster. And I remember looking at that, this 19 thing even then. 19 years after the Challenger disaster, after the Apollo 1. So I don't know if anybody died in the process, but yeah, it's reasonable to say they don't kill people in simulations. This is why I had to get rid of the term false flag from our lexicon. We shouldn't use that term because it implies people died. Anybody saying false flag is 5 years behind on their assessment of what media is. It's like people who say psyop, like Joe Rogan, but don't know about the psy war, the big picture. They need to catch up.
So yeah, I've been removing false flag and psyops from my lexicon as well because of this exact reasons it's being co-opted. I saw that clip of Joe Rogan. Once I heard Joe Rogan say the word psyop, I'm like, it's over. It's done. Time to move on. Pack up. Let's go, boys. I was like, we need to change our terminology. But the thing is with Michael Aquino, you had brought up the Mind War paper, which is short. He wrote a whole book after, which I'm still going through, and it is. I'll certainly send screenshots of some highlights in it. But he talks about how the point of the Mind War, of faking wars, of not just social cultural wars, but wars abroad. And so the point of that is to feed into the natural instinct of people being satisfied by victory. And even though people hate war, that's why the narrative of false flag is very appealing to conspiracy-minded people. It's like, oh, the government had to do this horrible thing and everyone got convinced, okay, let's do it. It's easier if no one died during them, right? It's actually easier. It's more difficult to have killed someone in a false flag and then deal with the legal ramifications of people dying in these false flags. It's just much better to tell, these people, they died, and then they just exit the world stage.
Well, there's also a built-in fallacy here that the truthers tend to cling to, which is the appeal to motive. Why wouldn't they kill us? They're so bad. Or, oh, you think they're so good they wouldn't kill us? And I'm like, that's a appeal to their motive. It doesn't advance your argument. Just because you think they're so bad doesn't mean you can justify making these claims about the terrible things that they have done. Although they give us a lot of clues that are look, Conscious Reality and Kevin Mooring here. She says, what is the deal with the milk carton and the missing children and the got milk? And then Kevin Mooring says milk is Molech. So you take out the vowel, Molech. So you get Molech, the bull, then you got Elsie, you got the cow and the milk and the missing kids. It does create a very compelling and scary picture. And the question is, how much of that is psyop and how much of it is something more sinister? And I think the default is everything is sinister and scary as portrayed. And if you look at this Kathy O'Brien and even the QAnon thing, this is a story that's been going on for a long time. They just recycle it, these various panics about like witch hunts, for example. And I think it just seems like it's easy to believe. Sadly, it's easy to believe that Hillary Clinton eats babies. Roseanne Barr's screaming on the stage, Hillary Clinton eats babies. Did anybody think that was unreasonable? No. But just because it's easy to believe doesn't mean it's true. It's just a cognitive bias thing, I think.
Yeah, I think we can discount what is it called? Sitcom actresses as credible witnesses screaming in front of huge audiences, or everyone's like, oh my gosh, yes, this politician ate babies. And the thing is, you talk about argumentation, they're so evil, why wouldn't they do that? You should ask them, why wouldn't they fake it? Do you know how much easier it is? That was the big thing that made me transition into the simulated news events, is when I realized, if you've ever done stage production or film editing or any of this, it's a lot easier to do stuff in post-production or to editing than to actually do it. Much less.
I was in the military, and 90% of what we do we're just drills. Large-scale drills, the whole unit, the whole base, moving around, testing their weapons, pretending stuff. And my job was NBC, so it's primarily unit readiness for fallout from these high altitude nukes going off, and we'd have these hypothetical situations. And so Glenn Clark says, you got to be careful thinking like this. Just because you don't see or look for victims doesn't mean they're not dying. And then Norba says, you can't kill people in a movie, but Pearl Harbor was not a movie. So these are two comments I want to address. The first one is, you got to be careful thinking like this. Just because you don't see them doesn't mean people aren't dying. That's somewhat true. But if there's any credible evidence, it would turn something up, and there hasn't been. The second thing with the Pearl Harbor.
Could I just say?
Yeah. How can we assume it's not a movie? We know the history of media simulations, of decoys, inflatable tanks, inflatable everything, wooden missile launchers. There's so much fakery, and there are drills going on, and psyops happen not just in classrooms, or shopping malls. They do psyops in the theater of war. So no, I don't think we can just rule in that we can just assume these things were real because we saw it on TV. And There's been a lot of work on this.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Something I've been saying a lot to, for people, because that's the first reaction. It's not unusual to see in the chat and stuff. Yes, people die in war. Yes, people die in horrific accidents. And what I am suggesting, what I keep repeating, is that there is an inverse relationship between the legitimacy of a tragedy and its popularity. Like, I do believe there are real war crimes, there are real atrocities being done in the world, but we don't hear about them. The ones that we do hear about, you better believe, are pre-scripted, pre-edited, polished up, pre-posed to get the right shots for the headlines and perfect Pulitzer Prize winning photos. You know what I mean? And Michael Aquino in Mind War, he was in the book, he was talking about that we lost Vietnam because of the news internally. It's like we didn't lose it abroad, we lost it at home. And they said that cannot be acceptable in future wars. It's like, so the real mind war enemy, there's no enemy in mind war. Everyone must be involved, domestically and abroad. And before the fight even starts, long before any soldier picks up a rifle, we need to inculcate in every form of medium that is available to all members or participants of it, they need to be subconsciously associated. He used these really advanced words of like liminal sensory management and subliminal. So there's like those two, liminal and subliminal. Subliminal is like predictive programming type stuff where you find like for a second in a film. Liminal are like these big narratives and characters you see on the world stage. But yeah.
Right. Well, I think people underestimate the scale of fakery that's possible. Like, there are a lot of people who are, mostly cutting edge thinkers on the subject who will say, no, some people must have died at this event because there were so many victims. And that's where they're falling for the mind war. They're overwhelmed, that the emotional impact overwhelms their intellectual breakdown of it. And sometimes you don't have enough information to know. Like, I couldn't immediately tell you when I first saw it, here's how I know it could have been faked. I wasn't fully apprised of all the elements involved. But as time goes on, you get more information if you're searching, doing your due diligence, and you find, okay, well, if there's concurrent drills, then you automatically can include the possibility of, the personnel are right there. The closed movie set is set up. The mass casualty simulation model makes sense as being proposed as this is how they're faking the news. It's a mass casualty operation. And it's not just the big bloody terror attacks and shootings that are faked. It's everything. So the scale of fakery is often underestimated. And at this point, that's one of our major paradigm shifts here, is that we have to get past the point of assuming the essential reality of the news. And if someone is going to say, some people did die, I'm like, well, what are their names? Let's get to specifics. And people used to call in and say, oh, I know somebody whose best friend's uncle died in 9/11. And I'm like, give me the name. And they generally hang up, or they give me some name that doesn't match the list.
Well, the thing is, like, for me, is, drills are huge. Because how many people die in drills? It's like, it's a drill. It's like, by that definition, no one should die. It's a drill. And I don't know if you've done any film editing before, but like for me, you can many times identify fakery just by looking at the way the older reports are filmed and presented on the news. Like the Oklahoma City bombing, if you look it up, it looks like a scene out of, a Michael Mann film, like out of Heat or something. Like the camera angles are striking of people like running around carrying and stuff. And then you look at Columbine, the funerals where the children were going, they had like low angle power shots and sweep up as the girl puts the flowers down on the grave. And this is on the news. And I'm just like, this is real. I'm like, come on, this is like pre-filmed. Like this can't be organic. And that's, I think that heuristic I mentioned earlier, the probability of something being true is inversely proportional to how popular it is. Like once something is huge, it's not. No.
Well, we can always classify these, and there's always hallmarks that determine, whether something's an extraordinary claim versus something that's not extraordinary. But yeah, the fakeability is unquestionable. We know what they can fake at scale. And at this point, you can't even take for granted that you can just look at it and say it looks fake, because right now, nothing looks fake anymore. Everything's essentially fakeable. And so you can no longer rely on that. You can no longer just say it's all fake and everything's fakeable. You have to actually be able to get more sources. I think that's really the key. You can't just rely on the story from the sources that they provide, but you have to look at everything preceding it as well. Because in my view, any major psychological operation or suspected one, the first thing you should look for is there a precedent for this? Have we been conditioned to accept this? Has it saturated Netflix and all the streaming services? Is it in all the books and video games? And I can provide countless examples of the buildup to a major fake event, to where there's like a chorus of people shouting it's about to happen, and then it does. And then it's like, oh, well, we expected it. It goes down very easy. This is the case with 9/11. Look at how many people are credited, like Alex Jones, with predicting 9/11. He predicted the Trump head wound. Well, they weren't predicting it. They were doing the act. They were propagandizing us with the notion so we would accept it when they faked it, with a terrible magic trick, by the way.
Yeah, and that's a really good point about how advanced the fakery is getting. I was more talking about like older, like things that once an event has occurred, there's so much retroactive programming. Hollywood films made right afterward. United 93, what is it? Edward, I forgot the director's name. The same one who did JFK, like World Trade Center and stuff. People just accept it as true. But if you go back and see that there's been a precedent of faked black swan events, then it's like you should apply the same principles to even modern events, no matter how much better it looks. And when Michael Kino mentioned you need to work through every medium available, it's changed so much since that book was released. Now it's in tweets. Now it's in like these influencers and all the people talking about how Trump's going to get a head wound. SNL, the first term Trump had, Alec Baldwin, because I was looking into Alec Baldwin when he portrayed Trump on SNL. The first skit where he plays Trump as on SNL, he's doing the press conference. The very first joke of this 17 million view YouTube video, the very first joke he makes is about Trump getting assassinated 2 months into his term. He says, I'm the 45th president, and 2 months later, Pence will be the 46th president. And that's the first joke he says, and then they keep going as if he didn't even say that.
Exactly. And so this is what Mind Wars exposes or reveals as a methodology, is that you saturate the media environment so that these are conclusions that we reach on our own, that they don't have to nudge us very hard, because we've all already accepted the premise this is about to happen. And I think it's very curious. You look at things like Trump has a whiskey bar in Trump Tower, and they sell shot glasses that has a 45 and a 45, a bullet going into it. Trump is a teetotaler. He doesn't drink. He tells his kids not to drink. Why does he have a signature shot glass with his signature on it and a bullet going to the side of it? To me, there's just so many examples of this scenario, and props, movies. We've been conditioned to accept it as something that was going to be like basically the logical end result. And you look back at 2016, 2017, they were killing Donald Trump in Central Park in Julius Caesar. So this has been like a murder fantasy for a long time. But again, the whole point of it was when they do it, no one's going to question the validity of it. They're just going to talk about the motivations.
And that's the most frustrating thing to me, is because there's so much suggestion leading up to it that then when it does occur, you can't question it. But even if you call it out in advance, that's why I'm trying to be very specific about I'm like right eye wound, radicalized America First gamer, probably. Like I'm getting narrowing down some very specific details, like the probability cloud, trying to make it as narrow as possible, because when it occurs, people will say, well, anyone could have called that. You're not smart. And it's like, well, that's exactly the point I'm trying to make. Yeah, anyone could have called it because we live in this mind war, because of all the subliminal.
That's one of my fundamentals. I'm saying we are looking at predictive programming as a model for predicting what's going to happen in the future. And as we applied this, we realized not only are we spot on all the time, and look, I think it was Bill Maher recently said that if you want to know what's going to happen tomorrow, look at the news from 30 years ago, look at the movies from 30 years ago. But I was saying we use this as a model, and we've applied it, and then we began to account for what I call concurrent programming, where there are real-time alignments in movie trailers, movies, books, and video games with what is about to happen or what is happening at that very moment, where it's inescapable. And one of the key examples I have for concurrent programming is I'm watching the Roe v. Wade overturned, and it's like a big protest. I'm like, okay, change the channel, watch Netflix, HBO. I turn on House of the Dragon, Game of Thrones, and the opening scene is the queen dying in childbirth because she had no choice. She had no bodily autonomy. And I realized, okay, this is direct political messaging. It's concerted, and it's targeting the same people who are mad at the Supreme Court. And then I started realizing, okay, the predictive programming isn't merely stuff in the past, but it's actually up to the minute. And oftentimes, it's too late for the event. For example, Collateral Damage with Arnold Schwarzenegger, they had to rewrite the movie because it was so reminiscent of what just happened at 9/11. It was about to be released. They had to delay it. So that was predictive programming that didn't get out on time.
Yeah, and I think the synchronization or the concurrent programming you've identified, I think it might be because our attention economy is now so much more high velocity. Like people's memories now are getting, I would imagine this kind of technique of priming 30, 40 years ago would be done on a much longer scale and in books and in posters, over these memes. But now they need to do rapid fire, like 5 Netflix shows, all your alt-right influencers. Everyone needs to be parroting it surrounding the event.
Well, looking back though, looking back, now that we know that concurrent programming is a thing, I do find that you'll see that when the event happens, there are things happening that day. Like 9/11 was preceded by a few months by the lone gunman. JFK's assassination was preceded by Suddenly and the Manchurian Candidate. And then 2 months before his assassination, weirdly, he and Jackie were simulating his death at that vacation retreat while, basically enlisting the Secret Service in, covering him in Heinz ketchup, pretending he was dead. So I'm just saying that predictive programming and concurrent programming, real-time alignments with the entertainment, the movies, and what happens, this has been a feature from the beginning. So it's less mysterious now when you look at the objective here, that there's a global government, monolithic, and it's basically has this agenda of aligning all of the entertainment media with what they're going to portray as the world, as seen through the lens of mass media news. And there's an intentional alignment for the purposes of directing our collective attention. This is just perception management, but they don't only do it for what's happening right now and tomorrow, but they have projections going decades into the future. And this perfectly explains how you can have multiple directors putting multiple references to future transformative psychological warfare events in their movies. It is actually, to me, this is the best explanation for what we're seeing. The meta script explains it all.
And I was going to say is when you understand that it's a meta script, you can then start looking for like themes and like say like evaluate news events like art, look for foreshadowing, look for symbolism, look for all literary devices, visual literary devices as well even. And I'm very, very confused by that Vanity Fair article that had come out, a couple of weeks ago saying, remember, this is breaking news. They just discovered that JFK and Jackie had done that home movie where JFK was killed 2 months before he was actually assassinated, right? And I'm like, why only now? Yeah. Why only now would they release that? Right?
Yeah, exactly. And even in bringing this up, in that article in Vanity Fair talking about JFK's home movie, their spy movie where he dies, and they have even a shot of the Ford Lincoln that looks like Zapruder's shot. But even in that article, they said maybe it was prophetic. Maybe he had some kind of prophecy. And they bring up all these movies that seem to be influencing Lee Harvey Oswald, for example. So they mystify it.
I see. Yeah. That's a big thing because you're talking even about people going to, Antarctica and others. A big narrative that I've seen in all fictional media and stuff, I think I've talked to you about this before, is the Gnostic view of like breaking out. Like we're in a system and we're going to break out. It's controlled. And I saw in the chat, someone had, in tonight's chat, someone said, like, even the normies are waking up. People are seeing it's all fake. I don't get enthusiastic. I'm not talking to you, Tim. I'm saying to
no, I get it.
Don't
I get it.
Enthusiastic.
I saw this happen.
Part of it.
I called this out when white noise happened, when the connections were made, and we've seen videos of this, compilations by World Stage on Twitter, about how white noise preceded what happened in Palestine, Ohio. And even the news media had to be aware of it. And they're like, oh, look, this is an eerie coincidence between these events. And a lot of people are saying, this is going to wake people up. They're going to see it's all scripted. And I was like, nah, they're going to forget about it in 5 minutes. And just like I said, they all forgot about it. And that's because they're not looking at it from the right frame of reference. If you have the frame of reference of the mainstream news or MSM plus alternative news, right or left, truth doesn't matter. If you're speaking the truth, you're framing it wrong. The people who are able to accurately say Trump's head wound was faked on 7/13 don't have the understanding to say the fireman was necessarily faking his death and the Secret Service were in on it and the AP was in on it. They can't see the big picture. They have blinders on. They're very myopic. So the truth is out there, but it's drowned out with so much noise that nobody can put it together. You have to have the understanding of the box. I think you have to be on the other side of the screen to be objective.
I think you talked about this with Ab as well. I think the kind of people who are able to come to the off-world stage perspective are almost like artists in a way. You have to have an artistic streak in you to understand the capability. Because if you really, what's his name? The guy who directed Citizen Kane. His name, Orson Welles, that's it. I have to send you this interview clip where he's saying, he's like, he famously in an interview said, I don't think politicians are crooks. I think they're actors. And the greatest art they're doing is what's on the stage. And he was being dead serious in this like audience of people. He just straight up says it. And yeah, I think the only reason why people are like losing the forest for the trees, because they hone in on like one thing, they see like that might be fake, and they don't have the frame of reference to see that, yeah, that's not the only thing that's being faked. It's being faked because of a much bigger picture that breaks the left-right dichotomy. Because, like you said, a lot of people questioning 7/13. Wasn't Rosie O'Donnell even saying like, oh, his ear? And so, yeah, that's in the box. If you're only questioning it just because you want to say Donald Trump's a crook, and stuff, you're not getting it. You're not in a. You don't see the whole picture.
Well, that's understandable though, because they're going off of tradition and habit and conditioning. And so one point I had to make here is that society is divided really between the believers and knowers, and it's predominantly believers. There aren't as many knowers or agnostics as there should be, but this is the main distinction. The world of beliefs and subjective beliefs is completely separate from the perspective that is inclusive of psyops. So if somebody isn't psyop aware, like the individual that was talking to Joe Rogan, then they have no situational awareness. They are in the simulation. They're Truman. Everybody's in a Truman show until they're aware of how psyops have actually formed their worldview. It's not just seeing through the individual psyops, but which psychological operations, which hoaxes have inserted constructs into your worldview that actually impact your decisions. If you believe in the atom bomb and you believe it's possible that the North Korean dictator could push some button and blow us up or something, if you believe that, then we live in two fundamentally different worlds. If you believe in space junk, we live in different worlds. My worldview doesn't account for these things, which I would consider to be God constructs and hyperstitions. And if you add up all of the hyperstitions and God constructs, you actually see a worldview which is distorted and doesn't reflect the territory. And so that's where we are. We're separating the terrain from the simulation. And a lot of people are still in the simulation defending its lies. And when you ask them for evidence, they come up short. All they can say is they believe really hard.
Well, the funniest thing about the Truman Show is you're at the end when Jim Carrey steps off the set, the movie kind of ends. But I like to think further. And I'm like, well, what did he step out to? Didn't you get to see the audience in the film? They also live in a Truman Show. So it's like a Matroka doll. You're stepping outside into another, kind of control thing. And I think that's absolutely what's going to happen with the Gnostic narrative is that there's going to be a false great awakening. There's going to be, and I think it will be tied to Trump. It's going to bring about these great changes, triple quotation marks, right? But it's all going to be on the screen. People are going to be totally sold on it and trying to tell them, no, it's all hopium. We're still, the same handlers are in control, so they won't listen. So, but the work you're doing here and that's being done here is excellent. I'm sorry I took up this call. It's been going on.
Oh, no.
Long.
I mean,
in case anyone else wants.
What you brought up just now, though, kind of reminds me of this TV show's 10 episodes. It was called Space Cadets, where they had 5 people convinced they were in low Earth orbit. And what made it a success is that half of the astronauts were actors, lying and pretending to believe, and they prevented the non-actors from interacting. So in other words, they prevented the auto-hoaxers, the conspiracy theorists, from creating a complete narrative. And it lasted for 10 days. And then it opens up And they're crying because they figure out they weren't in space and it was just a TV show and the studio's laughing at them. And I remember watching this thinking, okay, so we're laughing at them, but meanwhile, we have collectively been put into a false paradigm. So it's kind of this lack of self-awareness that would allow us to laugh at them. Same thing with what you brought up with the Truman Show is that, yeah, he gets out there into the world and he's just in another level of simulation.
And, I think the way it works is the Hegelian dialectic is they provide the MSM plus for the people who are at the boundaries of the dome, if you will. They're like getting close to the edge. And then it's like, I'm going to break out. And then they go back into I think it was that horseshoe model you made. They get funneled back into the system by going out of, quote unquote, out of the system. Right. And that's what I'm telling everyone here is like, be on the lookout for that. And, again, my mindwar.page, I just opened that today.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. One of the objectives of Autohoaxology 101 and of the Autohoax cons is to start building up a network of people who are operating with an awareness of the psywar itself. And the more of us that build content in this arena, the bigger the parallel media grows. So anybody producing content from this perspective is going to be promoted here. So mindwar.page. And I'm glad that you have that domain because we have to take these terms and we have to make use of them so that it doesn't get drowned out. Like the term auto-hoax, auto-hoaxing the MSM. We have to get ahead of these things because the term psyop has been rendered functionally useless. And Mindwar accurately describes what we're in. And I do have, and I'll bring this up after the call, I do have a link to the full 460-page PDF.
Nice. Yeah, I've been reading an EPUB of it as well. Definitely worth reading. And again, it's like you don't have to agree. You don't have to always agree with everything that's being said. It's good to know what are the other perspectives. And you talk about astrotheology. Like my pet theory is history is faked within each empire. Like I think there was a fake history in the Roman Empire. There was a fake history in the Greek Empire. There's a fake history in the Medes and the Persians and the Babylonians. And within each of them, they used astrotheology. This is why biblical prophecy, it doesn't align up with the news. And this is why all the QAnoners and the MAGA-tards who thought Ephesians 6:11 or the beast with the wound and stuff, they're in the system. The biblical prophecies are not talking about the simulation at all. It's talking about reality, like above it. It talks about like empires passing and going. It's not talking about little, oh, wow, I just saw on TV my favorite thespian almost got shot. That must mean it's this verse. Like, please. Right?
Well, I get it. I get it. The metascript is very eclectic, and it's not respectful of the source material. It's a big Frankenstein construct, and they just throw it all in there, but it works. Anyway, thanks again for the call, and have a great weekend.
Thanks,
all right, everyone. That would be Leo Pirate, and yeah, he has a valid point. We're looking at syncretism. One of the main, I think, concepts here when it comes to looking at our modern world, what I call nasatology, is syncretism. How an older paradigm rooted in a pagan worldview has been updated with the trappings of science fiction. That's pretty much what explains it all. So I have a link here on my minds.com/Infinite Plane Society to the full Mind War book. And, one thing, this is the one that we talked about, Mind Wars, from the Michael Aquinos, from the Temple of Set. The Temple of Set split off. It was a splinter from the Church of Satan. The Church of Satan didn't believe, they were atheistic, they didn't believe in a literal devil, and they didn't want to do degrees. So Michael Aquinos split and formed the Temple of Set, which replaced Satan and the whole Judeo-Christian frame with Egyptian mythology, and Set, the Prince of Darkness. And this separate group had a degree system. If you're a 5th degree, you get to be called a Maga. I don't know if you get a Maga hat, but you certainly get the rank of Maga if you're a 5th degree black wizard. And the Temple of Set, Michael Aquinos is known for a few things, but mainly it's this book on Mind War, and that's what we've been talking about. So I have some definitions of it. And, weirdly, I was just watching the second half of Conan the Barbarian, where he is crucified on a tree and he dies. And then his girlfriend, Valeria, makes some kind of a contract with the spirits and they bring him back. So he's crucified. He goes through the world of the dead. He's dead for a minute, then he comes back. And then he goes and he confronts Thulsa Doom, played by James Earl Jones. And this is the leader of the Temple of Set, or the Set worshippers. So they worship Set, the Prince of Darkness, the snake god. And at the final confrontation, Set calls him, he says, I am your father now. And just like Luke. Remember when Luke Skywalker, and the Mandela effect, it didn't hear it this way, but Darth says, no, I'm your father. And Luke said no. But anyway, similar scene here with Thulsa Doom calls Conan his son. And he emphasizes, you are my son. And I think this gets into the sun god versus the Prince of Darkness storyline. Because Set, sun sets, Prince of Darkness, Set kills the sun god. So they bring up the same body of symbols in all these various movies. It's really a kind of a staple if you look at Hollywood, where they're constantly using these mainstream movies to promote these older myths. I'm scrolling through your comments to make sure I haven't missed anything. Phones are open. 1-900 Shed Dog says, what is Mandela affected? Mandela affected means that one has been affected by Mandela effects, which is truly just the misinformation effect. Yeah, if you want to call in, the number is 505-510-4226 if you want to advocate on behalf of mainstream media propaganda and lies. Floor is open. So, mind war, this is the definition from the book, is the psychological and psychophysiological conditioning for participants in a socio-political problem to stabilize it without recourse to violence. This is just like what we've been talking about, the notion of superstition, maintaining the cohesion of the Roman state. It goes on to say, the base term is a composite of the principle of mind and war, the extreme expression of intolerance of disagreement between at least two social groups. Mind war is not zombification. It's not controlling minds. It doesn't destroy them either. Sensationalist media exposés of government-sponsored brain experimentation have no connection with mind war. So I'm glad we brought this up. Mind war is not zombification. It's not MK Ultra. It's propaganda saturation and influence operations. It's marketing. It's manipulation, but it's not zombification. And I think that's why they have characters like Kathy O'Brien out there, to make it appear to be more extreme than it is. It's actually quite subtle. It is interesting that Michael Aquinos would write this, because the subtlety of this form of lying is sort of befitting a guy whose main deity is the snake god. Infinite Plane Radio.
Hey, it's Josh again. You're talking about the Mandela effect?
The misinformation effect, mislabeled as the Mandela effect, but yes.
Well, it's the one bone I have to pick with you, because I feel like I've definitely been Mandela affected, or maybe Mandoodled. But I remember as a child Mandela dying in prison. I remember that one.
Wait, hold on. When you say you remember, this is the thing. When you say I remember him dying, what do you remember? Were you at your parents' house? Were you at school? Were you reading the newspaper? What caused you to?
What I'll agree with you is his memory is it's a sketchy subject, but I remember that. I remember Mandela dying, and then the Fruit of the Loom logo. I know that thing had a cornucopia on it. I just know it. I remember seeing it as a child.
Okay, now let me explain. Let me explain the cornucopia and how my explanation goes. Is this, and this is the misinformation effect explanation. So we all had Fruit of the Loom, and we all associated cornucopias with, because Thanksgiving. So it's natural to associate a pile of assorted fruit with a cornucopia thing. It's a normal association. But when somebody says, do you remember when you were a kid if your underwear had a cornucopia on the logo. Well, when they ask you that, what they're really doing is what I call an imagination prompt. They're actually asking you, like a hypnotist, imagine your old label with a cornucopia on it. They don't tell you to imagine it, but they actually prompt the imagining. So now in your mind, you have an image of the old logo. And now they say, do you remember A or B? Well, actually, you remember both. And then they tell you, oh, B doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And so what I'm saying is that the imagining gets stored as a memory in that very moment. And that's called the misinformation effect. It replaces the old file. And I experienced this myself the other day where I was rereading a book I hadn't read in like 10 years. I put down a book after one chapter, forgot about it. I bought it again. I didn't remember it, but I'm reading the first chapter and I instantly remember the scene. Well, there's no way I remembered like the font. There's no way I remembered the text or what the page looked like physically, but I remembered the scenes that were prompted in my imagination. They were as real to me as memories. So I had memories of things I imagined that were recalled instantly. And what I'm saying is that the Mandela effect uses the misinformation effect, where it gets you to imagine something, and then that thing you imagine becomes a memory. It's a false memory. That's my explanation.
Yeah, no, like I agree with like what you're saying. I just have like, for me, it's like just a few like core memories that are like I can't get out of my head, and so I get it. Like I mean, if I had to like probably put money in Vegas, I'd probably say right, but it's, to me, it's unsettling that like I can't reconcile the fact that
I get it. I get it. I get it.
I will say this. It's like, it's not an ongoing effect. It's a few things from my childhood. And yeah, memory can be kind of messed with. So it is something I'd more watch for in the future, It's like,
well, I go after like specific things. Like one of the features I find is that these memories aren't all that deep, and there's only one or two versions of the thing. There's no like 10 versions of the logo. But
well, you would think it'd be more than just like Dolly's braces, like you'd think it'd be like more like recent stuff.
And I think the trick is this too. The trick is context. For example, Brian Staveley, who's one of the lead proponents of the Mandela effect, says he's never watched Moonraker. So you're judging whether she had braces by one scene. You should have to watch the whole movie. So you need expanded context. That's another feature of the Mandela effect, is it lacks context. So they'll say everybody knows Timmy fell down the well. Nobody knows how he got out. So that's a major red flag here, that these aren't real memories, but these are just memes that are being implanted. But if you have any real discrepancies, I'd be interested to hear them. But my explanation, I think, right now is the misinformation effect, which doesn't sit well with true believers in reality shifting.
So that CERN video, do you remember that they had like that CERN video where they were all dancing around, and there was like 007 on a postcard? I think Mandela was on a postcard, like on a, or like a poster board.
Oh yeah, in fact, Tom Hanks went to CERN, and their CERN pamphlet had all kinds of weird like Mandela effect adjacent memes and stuff. And so these are interesting to look at. Like here's a big one, Chick-fil-A. A lot of people say Chick-fil-A used to be CHIC filet, like chic filet, that there is no K. And then you wonder, well, how does somebody arrive at that kind of conclusion? Well, I figured it out. If you buy their crisscross fries, on the box, the K is on the other side. So you only see CHIC. On the wrappers, you don't see the K. So you could easily form a memory of Chick-fil-A without the K. And then when you're told there's a discrepancy, suddenly it hits you. So I think there's reasons for the false memories, but I think they are indeed false memories, not evidences of parallel dimensions.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you.
But anyway, hey, I appreciate your call, and apparently we're Mandela affected. It's Ryan Ravely. I got the name off. But I think we have another caller coming in. So thanks for calling.
No, thanks. I appreciate it. I'm going to try to work that out.
All right. Have a great evening.
Thanks, man.
All right. So, okay, discrepancies, reality shifts, false memories, parallel dimensions. What is the most likely explanation? One of the things that led me to my conclusion is the prevalence of faulty eyewitness testimony resulting in real-world convictions of people for things they didn't do. So people will give false testimony. And if you look into how they arrive at the false testimony, it's the interrogator bias. It's how they ask the questions. It's the framing of it. It's almost like a carnival game. Do you remember Jiff or Jiffy? That will prompt a response. And when you ask them, do you remember Jiff or Jiffy, they create a visual of each one. And these are now juxtaposed. That's the trick. They're implanting, through suggestion, a false memory. This is a very well understood phenomenon. There was a psychiatrist that talked about Bugs Bunny and managed to get these people to say that they saw Bugs Bunny in Disneyland. And Bugs Bunny's Warner Brothers. But she described it as by putting things into their frame of reference, it kind of gets Trojan horsed and they will remember it wrong. But the interrogator bias is a real thing. People do go to prison over faulty eyewitness testimony. And so if you were to ask somebody, have you noticed anything unusual about your peanut butter? They would say, no, you're crazy for asking. But if you ask them, do you remember Jiff or Jiffy? You get an answer. So it's also a sales pitch. You know, in sales, you do this assumptive form of questioning where you're trying to get them to make a decision and to commit. And what you're getting people to do in the Mandela effect is you're getting them to commit to your false premise. And I'm not saying that the Mandela effect spreaders know what they're doing. No, I think that there are true believers in this thing. Like they're more likely to accept, and this is Occam's razor, that the dictionaries changed than that they misspelled a word. But it's a fascinating topic. I plan to do a full takedown documentary on it. If anybody wants to take part, I have a cinematographer on hand and I have all the research material. I was just thinking about launching it, so I might put that into production. Does anybody here want to see a total takedown of the Mandela effect? If anybody does, let me know. And the Mandela affected are thinking outside the box, but they're also arriving at an erroneous conclusion. And the advantage to seeing through it is then you're no longer susceptible to these heavily biased frames that are used to get you to accept a faulty premise. It's very tricky. It's a magic show, and these are magic tricks, manipulations. Okay, whoever was just trying to call in, if you want to call back, the number is open. It's on the screen. Okay, so I'm going to continue. I have a couple of pull quotes from Mind War. So no, it's not zombification. It doesn't involve multiple personality disorder, trauma-induced mind control in that sense. Here are some notes on it. Mind war controls groups of humans. As the size of the group increases, common features of impressions, attitudes, and expressions emerge, can be identified and analyzed statistically, making possible social forecasting and the control of that future by aggregate, if not individual, manipulation. And we have seen this at work. We all witnessed 2020. We all became actors on the world stage, willingly or not. Okay, I'm going through some comments. I kind of missed out on something here. But if somebody wants to call in and fill us in. Weren't we just talking about utopia? Did we not just play a clip? I checked out Alex Jones today, and he was playing the same clip from Utopia that we had referenced when we were talking about the movie Utopia not only contains copious examples of concurrent programming at the time, predictive concurrent, but it also contains these characters who are analyzing comic books for insights as to what's going to happen in the future. They figured out predictive programming. And they got their hands on an advanced copy of a comic book in a series that gave them too much information, and the government had to send somebody in to go kill them. It's kind of interesting. Imagine if you got a copy of the script for the next 5 years. You'd be like Biff Tannen. You'd be able to use that information, which is something I hadn't thought about. You know, we're looking at the predictive model of predictive programming to determine, what are they going to do in the future? We should be thinking about this and making some decisions based on it. Like, maybe I should sell space junk helmets. Maybe we should sell products for people who are going to be confined at home because of fallout, knowing what we know. Girl says, Steve Biko died in prison and most people's memories are shallow and superficial when it comes to the news. Yeah, I would define most people as low information believers. Low information believers who are comfortable outsourcing their perceptions to the news agencies, their trusted blue checks. And it's easy. They do all the hard work. And who has the time to parse through 3 days worth of news every day? Because that's how much news they give us. Nobody. So unless you're apprised of what fake news is and are able to categorically reject certain claims, you're going to be immersed by default, and you're going to have to outsource your perceptions. You're going to be a low info believer because there is no information. If you were to actually try to find out what's the truth of the story, you'd be where we are. You'd say, well, now I know I know much more about the story, but now I no longer believe it's true. You know, what's the difference between a believer in a psyop and a non-believer? Well, it's a matter of research. Research outside of the frame that they gave you. Okay, let's see here. Norba says, the government has escalation levels, they just don't kill you. Right. Yeah, the anti-government angle is specifically targeted at the right. It should be pointed out as well. And one of the things I like to mention here, and I have an axiom for this, number 47 in Auto-Hoaxology 101. Anything that's perfectly bifurcated left and right is likely a political football or a tool for manipulation. So attitude towards big government, anything that's 100% partisan, I tend to look at as just mind war. It's info war stuff. Like FEMA being the bad guy. It kind of falls apart when you look at how partisan it is. Like, how come the left wing thinks Bill Gates is a savior and Elon Musk is the devil? And the right wing thinks Elon Musk is the savior and Bill Gates is the devil. They can't both be saviors and they can't both be devils. But they're each perceived as such to each of the side, which tells me that these are actors and the target audiences are responding as programmed. Okay, let us continue. Girl says, most Americans have super shallow memories when it comes to history at all. But what are we really looking at, though? What is their solid memory? What is their substantial memory going to be? It's a recollection of media-propagated messages. And knowing now what we do about the fakery, you're almost at an advantage if you didn't take it all so literally and take it seriously. But that's part of the saturation with so much information. The deluge is they want people to rely on outsourcing it. They want you to think it's outside of your capability to grasp it all, and they want to render you apathetic. Demoralization. Infinite Plane Radio.
Yeah, you give me 1 second to, well, we're not getting any feedback, are we? Hello?
Yeah, no, you're loud and clear.
All right, because I just want to clear up this Mandela effect about Nelson Mandela, because it just infuriates me.
Good, because I hate this one. Thank you.
Because if you went to, say, South Africa, or let's say the Netherlands, or even the UK, and started talking this bullshit, they wouldn't know what the hell you were talking about. And that's because Americans are super, super shallow and superficial when it comes to anything going on outside the U.S. And even in the U.S., people are shallow and superficial. Now, I'm somebody who obsessively follows the details of the narrative. Whether it's fake or real, I follow the details of the narrative. And I remember the negotiations to get Mandela out of prison. And they finally did negotiate a deal. And they said, we'll have a new election, and Mandela will be allowed to run for president. And he ran against the guy who had previously been the president, F.W. de Klerk, and he won. And he became the president of South Africa, the first black president of South Africa. I watched all this happen. The people who if you remember somebody dying in prison, the one you remember dying in prison is Steve Biko. He was the head of something called the Black Consciousness Movement, which you wouldn't have known. I'm talking to the Mandela effect people out there, not to you, but to people who think the Mandela effect is real. The reason why you remember Mandela dying in prison is because you wouldn't know the difference between Steve Biko and Nelson Mandela if the news reported that a leader of the Black Consciousness Movement died in prison. He was beaten to death, apparently. That's the story. Hello?
Well, to me, this is one of the things. A parallel news story or something that happened contemporaneously gets conflated. And
right,
this is
conflation. That's what happened. Conflation and confusion. But it only works because Americans are too shallow to care about the details. Oh, it was that black guy, not that black guy. Okay.
Or Ed McMahon.
And that's Brian Staveley. That is Brian Staveley to a T. Because I remember
Ed McMahon. Ed McMahon was with
he's a WWE guy. Brian Staveley has his picture there on Facebook, holding one of these big thick belts they give you for. I think he took an amateur course to learn how to do WWE type kayfabe. He's a WWE kind of guy, Brian Staveley, and so this is right up his alley. He wouldn't. You understand? He's not somebody who digs into the politics of the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, which, by the way, there were a lot of Americans here sitting. There were sit-ins. I want to talk about January 6th. There were regular demonstrations and citizens right there in the Senate and in the well of the House, in the United States Capitol, of people getting arrested. I remember Marion Barry, and there was another one, kind of a shadow representative of D.C., not Marion Barry, another one who well known in D.C. Fauntleroy, Walter Fauntleroy, long-time politician in Washington, D.C. And South Africa was like an ongoing, leftists were out there laying down in the street and getting arrested, laying down in the Capitol and getting arrested, protesting apartheid. But you see, most Americans aren't paying attention to that crap. Most Americans, they're apolitical. They don't care. So to me, the Mandela effect, it just confirms how shallow and ignorant.
It's not a mainstream belief, but the fact that it even has any kind of teeth right now is kind of a testament to what you're saying, that there's no internal fact-checking. They've accepted their model, and nothing can tear it down.
Well, and Brian Staveley was never paying any attention to the details the way somebody like me might have been, see? Headlines were coming at him from maybe the evening news, and didn't that guy die in prison? Oh yeah, what was his name? Well, it had to be Nelson Mandela, because here's the thing: take any person who insists that Nelson Mandela died in prison, and ask them to name one other leader of the black movement in South Africa against apartheid. They might name Winnie Mandela because everybody remembers her and the necklacing, right? The burning tires around people and all that. But they wouldn't say Desmond Tutu, who was as big as Mandela. They probably wouldn't remember him because the only reason you know who by the way, all these people are Knights of Malta.
Yeah, that's the test. That's the test, though. Test the memory. Like, how did they get Timmy out of the well? If they don't have more information that would reveal that there's an actual memory there, no, it's a surface level meme. It's a total trick.
Shallow. We live in the United States of the United Shallow States of America, where if you pay too close attention to the details, there's something wrong with you. You're just obsessed. If the day after 9/11 you start looking at the details, that just shows you're the one who's messed up. because you're not willing to accept the shallow, superficial, surface-level narrative, which never made any sense anyway. Oh, a plane hit the Pentagon. Well, wait a minute. I looked at it. I didn't see any plane. Oh, you're digging into the details too much. Oh, well, what about this particular media personality? In this case, I think it was one of the ones who regularly, Chris, one of the ones who covers the Pentagon all the time, and said, I see no evidence of a plane here at the Pentagon. I remember that. But a lot of people wouldn't have been paying attention to it. If I say, well, how many buildings went down? They wouldn't even know about Building 7. You know what I'm saying? Americans are so shallow. And what's happened is the media has made a virtue of shallowness. It's made a virtue out of being as superficial and shallow as you can. That's the meaning of the TikTok. How long of a video? What's the time duration of the average TikTok video?
I think that's,
it's all about.
I think you're right.
Shortening. To shorten the attention span is to shorten the memory span. It's the same thing. It's saying, I'm shortening your attention span so we don't have to feed you too many details.
Well, I kind of question this, though. The premise of shortened attention spans, or there's just increased competition because there's more content out there. Because people have a long attention span when it comes to binge watching on things like Netflix. So it's very selective, but it's there. But TikTok represents this frenetic attempt to capture our attention in the attention economy. It's desperate, and it's noise. And it's mostly noise, very little signal.
What was the original character limit on Twitter? Do you remember when Twitter started?
144.
Yeah, and here's what happened. Everybody said, oh, you like Twitter. You'll like Twitter. I said, what do you mean? I said they have a limit on. You can't make a coherent argument on Twitter because they only allow. What did you say? 140? How many? I don't remember numbers. How many characters was the original limit again?
144.
144. Why 144? Why not 133? Why not 3? Why not 144? Well, you can't say that much in 144.
Well, the concept of microblogging is what they were introducing,
right?
And then it used to lead to a lot of external sites. And then what they have done is they have lengthened it so that you don't have to go to external sites. Because mine used to lead people to my WordPress, and I think Musk was smart in cutting off and creating a closed system because he was bleeding money and views and time focused on the website. And now you have people watching multi-hour videos on X.
Right.
So they've lengthened it. It's no longer microblogging. That's not its primary function.
But there's a reason why that happened. Because when people started, I said, what is this exactly? And then I heard the name of it. And the name of it, I thought, Twitter, tweet. How insulting. I'm not some tweet. I said, what they're doing is they're degrading you. If you put one of your little 144 character lines out, one of your stupid snappy one-liners out there, oh, you just tweeted. And I said, there's no way in hell. What I think and what I say is non-trivial. If I'm going to say something, I expect to have maybe, like 300. I expect to have enough characters to say something meaningful. I'm not going to bother to post, but worse than that, I hated the name. I hated the idea of tweeting on Twitter.
I'm sorry, but I've always liked Twitter. I've liked microblogging. I've always saw it as
trivializes it.
No, the whole premise, though, isn't that you're trying to put complex things into 144 characters, but you're trying to get the attention to something, perhaps, and create a longer thread. But
how insulting. Are you a bird?
No.
Are you a bird?
In today's media environment,
it's a way of degrading and debasing argument and discourse. It's a way of degrading and lowering discourse to the least common denominator. You've got to figure out how to come up with a snappy one-liner in 144 characters, and I hated it. I wouldn't participate.
But that is not the way it's meant to be used. I mean, what I'm saying is that it is necessary in today's media environment where there's so many voices.
They could have called it micro. They could have called it microblog. And then I would have said, well, okay, the idea is just to get somebody's attention, but that's not what they did. They called it Twitter, tweet, because that's all we are. We're chirping birds. That's what we are. And Musk had to change the name of it to X because the shallowness and superficiality of Twitter tweet just didn't suit its purpose anymore because no one would I would never take it seriously. But I saw the name of it right away as a slap in the face and an insult.
I think it's worse now. I think it's worse now because there's no quality control. And the problem is that the public, the users, should be the quality control, but rather they're participants in the low quality noise, which has replaced all the signal. I mean, unless you're targeted and you're looking for something specific, it is a mess. I mean, I really...
Oh, yeah, I agree. And I'm not, I guess what I'm getting at is I look at some of these things and the way they name them is insulting. Didn't you think, I mean, look, I've been doing computers for 30 years. I've watched this whole thing grow up. And I saw the internet and the World Wide Web as a place that people could engage in like long, serious debates and discussions and argument and research, just a place for worldwide discourse. And along comes this asshole Dorsey, or whoever created it, and says, oh, now we've got Twitter, and you can tweet. And I remember that. I remember everybody saying, oh, aren't you on Twitter? And I said, I said, to me, the idea of putting my ideas or thoughts out there and someone saying, oh, so-and-so tweeted, it's just insulting. It just really bothers me that from a marketing standpoint, what kind of serious thinking person would want to have their remarks characterized as tweets? And when you see presidential candidates doing this, like Trump is on there tweeting, it probably wasn't even
let me bring this up. So Trump now has Truth Social. And lately, there's been this new trend of QAnon people making up Truth Social posts by Trump and then sharing them on Twitter, and they're going viral. So there's one going around where Trump says he's going to expose the CIA agents and arrest people who were involved in the JFK assassination. And so that's going viral, and now it's being fact-checked. So there are...
Yeah, Trump's role now is to roll out, like you heard, he wants to appoint Kash Patel, who doesn't matter who he is, to head the FBI, and the first thing they're going to do is release the Epstein client list, and I think he said he'd release the P. Diddy client list as well. So I can see what's going to happen now. They're going to use this Trump administration to restage every media narrative, every media rabbit hole for the last, 10 years or longer, going all the way back to the Kennedy assassination, to keep people plugged in, to keep people hooked, to keep people kind of mesmerized. That's what they're going to do, because there's nobody on the Epstein client list whose names we don't know already.
Is Trump on there? Isn't Trump on the list?
Oh yeah, everybody. I have a copy of New York Magazine that was published, I guess, about a year after Epstein was arrested, and it's literally the entire issue is an alphabetically indexed list of everybody who is in Jeffrey Epstein's little black book, and it's everybody. It's the mayor of New York. It's like, you know what I'm saying? It's everybody. It's anybody and everybody you could think of in social life and everything else, and it's investors, and so we have the list. We know who the business clients were. We know who the people were who allegedly flew on his plane and went down to his island. We've already been told all that. But it's like they want to run this, and I'm wondering how they're going to replay 9/11, because that's another one that Trump has promised he's going to release some classified information.
This is 2016 all over again. Nothing that you've said has not. It's already been promised before.
Right,
How about this? When he builds the wall, then let me know. Otherwise, I'm not even paying attention because.
Well, can I point out something about that? And I said this.
And look, I'm not even pro-wall. I'm just saying that the wall was always a farce.
Oh, yeah, I know that. I know. You think the border is a psyop in itself. Although
yes.
I happen to think that it's a distraction from the fact that they're bringing them in by other means, in airplanes. I do believe there's a population replacement going on, displacement, but that's another argument. But, yeah, I mean, it is. They roll these things out again. And the point I wanted to make is, I look at things like timelines and laws and legislation that's passed and how money is spent. Trump was elected in 2016 with a Republican majority in both houses. That's a matter of historical record. And they had 2 years until the election of 2018, where I think they lost their majority in one of the houses, either the House or the Senate. They lost their majority. But between 2016 and 2018, they had 2 years to appropriate all the money and in other words, they had 2 years to make sure that the wall was either built or the legislation and the funding had been set aside, and it'd be a dead letter. It'd be a non-issue. 2 years they had to do it, and they didn't do it. And what happened was, after the 2018 midterm elections, the Republicans lost their majority. And then Trump said, oh, I can't continue building this wall or solving a problem at the border unless I issue an executive order calling for an emergency diversion of Pentagon funds to build the wall. And of course, there was no way that gave the Democrats an excuse to resist. It gave the Republicans an excuse not to fulfill their promise. So understand again, they had 2 years to take. You tell me, was 2 years long enough or not for Donald Trump and a Republican majority in both houses to end the border as an issue, to build the wall? How long is enough? But they deliberately didn't solve the problem. They deliberately did not complete what they had promised to do because they wanted to use it as an election issue again in 2018 and 2020. And so they lost their majority. And now that you ask yourself, how is it possible that with 4 years as president, Donald Trump wasn't able to just build a stupid friggin' wall and solve the border problem? They had 2 years to do it.
I'm not even convinced. I'm not even convinced there's a border problem, but...
Well, maybe there isn't, but what I'm saying is look at how they lead their followers around like a brass ring through their nose. I mean, all these Republican MAGA people should have been saying, you promised us you'd build a wall and solve that problem. You had 2 years to do it, and you deliberately stalled and procrastinated and failed to solve the problem. That was on purpose.
Hey, but at least we have Space Force now. Are you at all confident that they're going to be able to pull off an alien invasion now that Tucker Carlson is openly talking?
No, I don't think anybody would fall for that.
What do you mean? Tucker Carlson was scratched by an alien in his bed. He has scars to prove it, and all his followers believe it.
Tucker Carlson is the guy who spent 20 years calling people who are questioning the official 9/11 narrative parasites. That's the word he used. I don't know. I just don't know why anybody who has even the faintest idea about 9/11 and what happened, whether they've got a clear idea of it or not, I don't know how they could even bother taking Tucker Carlson seriously. I really don't.
Well, he's taken seriously by the he is like the mouthpiece of that entire demographic. He does represent what they believe, and it's pretty uniform. As sad as it is, as unbelievable as it is, this is what they actually believe, and it's weirder than Scientology.
Well, they're shallow people. They have no memory. They have no long-term memory. I mean, if they had really been interested in 9/11, they would have seen time and time again Tucker Carlson, every time he was confronted about it, he ridiculed and insulted people who were challenging the official narrative.
Wait, though, isn't it true? Isn't it true? The majority of MAGAs believe the official story. They believe it was Osama. The majority of them are not 9/11 truthers by any stretch.
Oh, I know that. But Alex, that's what makes somebody like Alex Jones so despicable. Because there was a guy who he got his original audience based on 9/11. That's where his audience came from, 9/11. He was the only, I'm old enough to remember those years between 2001 and maybe 2010 were the only place you could go just about to hear 9/11 talked about, hear people calling and say, hey, these were controlled demolitions. This was an inside job. You know, this was not an attack by ragheads with box cutters. The only place you could go to hear that said was Alex Jones InfoWars.
That's true. And what does that do? That underscores what I've been saying. There's a media monopoly. And if they've monopolized the alternative thinkers, then it's a guarantee that everybody is in the box. There is no alternative.
Anybody who doesn't despise Alex Jones for not, when Alex Jones endorsed Donald Trump and brought him on, you would have thought Alex Jones would have said, "Well, you're gonna give us the truth about 9/11, aren't you?" Because that was his flagship issue. And Jones' failure to do that, and also his flip-flopping on Sandy Hook, I don't know why anybody can even talk.
Wait,
I don't know why anybody doesn't.
The thing is, wait. Jones was never going to reveal any truth. He's always been a player for the MSM construct, and the reason why people still follow him is they put entertainment value over ideology. The fact that
exactly.
He's super entertaining.
Exactly.
He's entertaining.
Entertainment
he's a
value
character
over anything. Actually, in order to have ideology, if you got any brains at all, you got to like read a little. You got to dig a little. You got to figure. You got to be able to justify what you believe in some sense. So ideology at least represents a higher level, not much. But you're right. Most people are so shallow and superficial they couldn't even sustain a consistent ideological framework.
I don't hold it against them. I don't call them shallow. I think their priorities are right. They should be focused on their families and enjoying their lives and ignoring the news to the best that they can. But
we got hate speech laws being passed right now. Every state now and the federal government is passing hate speech laws that specifically define things that you can't, that would, for example, make quoting the Bible hate speech. A lot of people are not aware of this now, but there are precedents being established that completely turn things like the First Amendment upside down. That's actually happening now. So it really gets into a question of how seriously do we take all of these laws and legal precedents that are being established, show trials, and people being charged based on recovered memories from 30 years ago. Like the Bill Cosby case that we saw, where there was virtually no hard proof, no evidence offered against him. Instead, it was just these memories these women had from like 20, 30 years ago. It was crazy. Things that would be thrown out of court. Hearsay, everything else. So I know you're going to say that these court trials are fake.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe there was something in the Jello.
Well, look, if my thinking is this, if an institution has demonstrated itself to be fake, it's time to defund it. I hate to tell you. Now, that goes, it's like all cops are Sandy Hook liars. So as far as I'm concerned, let's begin defunding police departments in places like Connecticut or New York City or Chicago. They're corrupt.
Well, I don't think you're not going to get popular support for refuting any side.
Maybe defund the FBI. Maybe start by defunding it, which I have always believed was a total violation of the Fourth Amendment and unconstitutional.
Well, in my opinion, resistance is futile because we live in a massive asylum, and all you're going to do is get the patients riled up, and the orderlies are going to put them in their place. There is
you don't want to fight the laws, and you don't want to deal with the legal ramifications of any of this.
I just think, look, everybody.
You're in court yourself. Suing YouTube and going after
Q.
Q and all basically the people behind Q. Now, and that's a civil procedure, I guess, but
civil unlimited. I'm asking for $5 million, and now I'm moving it into a different venue.
We're going to find out. Are we going to find out how real that? In other words, how fake or how real is it to go into court?
Oh,
and
what do you mean?
Here's the thing. If the police come to your door, and say, you posted something on social media that violates the law, you've published something that is classified as hate speech, am I to say, well, you can't arrest me, you're fake? If they show me a warrant,
I hope it happens. Look, if they define,
is that what it's going to come to?
I hope so. I would get arrested. Like if you want to be promoted in alt media, get swatted. If I could get arrested for a meme, it would do everything that we need for this channel to blow up.
There's a whole book out now by one of these alleged journalists called Inside the it's a book about all the people that were arrested for January I keep thinking January 7th, but I really mean January 6th, don't I? It's October 7th in Gaza, in the January 6th insurrection. I think it's called Inside the January 6th. Oh, Inside the Wing, in January 6th Wing, I think it's called. Yeah, I think that's what it's called. But she interviewed all of these people who she claimed. Well, let me put it this way: she didn't actually interview them. She did, like historical studies of like Enrique Tarrio. She has a whole chapter on like Enrique Tarrio, and a lot of them turn out to have long criminal records. Like Enrique Tarrio, he's called the founder of the Proud Boys. He's got a record for like assault. I think grand larceny. I mean, the guy's got a criminal record going back years and years.
Oh yeah, look, we're led by federal informants on the ground. They're all like that, and that's not inconsistent with what we've seen in Trutherville in general, where a lot of these individuals in key places have something that made them useful to the state. They made some deal. That guy is not someone you'd pick to be the face of white nationalism because he's from what was it, Puerto Rico or something, and yet there he is espousing these talking points that don't align with him. Then you find out that he's a Fed. Hey, I got a question.
They're compromised. Yeah, they are compromised. But the thing is, if it's all fake, I want to defund these Feds.
I got a question for you. So next month, in 2 weeks, McToon and Witsit Gets It are going to Antarctica to make an observation of a 24-hour sun.
Oh, yeah, flat Earth. You want to talk?
Well, yeah, I want to ask your opinion. What do you think is going to happen if they view a 24-hour sun? What do you think it's going to do to the flat Earth community?
Well, yeah, we've been discussing this on Fakeology and on fakeologist.com, and also Jake Gibson, who publishes as Jake the Asshole. He's been talking about this trip too. And the point that everybody's making is it doesn't prove a goddamn thing. In other words, the 24-hour sun, really, you can make up any there are a lot of models. Look, to me, what we observe in the sky is nothing more than an optical effect. We've never been there. We don't. To observe the sun or the moon or the stars in the sky is equal to observing their reflection in a puddle of water on the street. I can go out after a heavy rainfall and look at the reflection of the moon in a puddle in the street or the sun. It's no different than what I'm looking at when I look at the sky. All I'm seeing are optical effects. No one's gone out there and brought back a piece of it and shown me that it's a real object. It's an optical effect. Now, what's causing that optical effect? We can't really say at this point. All we can say about the sun is that it does emit radiant energy, and we can measure that energy, and we can start fires with it, and we can heat ourselves with it, and we can grow crops with it, and everything else. So there's definitely something energetic going on there. But what we're looking at is nothing more than an optical effect. It tells us absolutely nothing about the shape of the Earth, the nature of the cosmos. Now we do have periodicity. We have a sky clock. We look at the sky, and we could use it to get reproducible results. And you said also the ability to predict eclipses, like in that movie Apocalypto by Mel Gibson. That's real power. Advanced knowledge of something like Halley's Comet or eclipses, that's power. That way you could say to people, oh, look, we're the high priests. You should listen to us.
Okay, well, so you're making the point, though, that this is just an observation. It's not really an experiment, and it doesn't necessarily change anything. Okay, so someone here is asking about the ISS, because I made the point that...
the hair. Have you seen the hair lately? Oh, my God, they got a new one out. The ISS crew just published a new video where they show how to pour, I don't know, they do some things. They do their stunts. And in this case, it involved, I don't know, pouring a liquid or something like that. And somebody called in. They were playing a tape of it, an audio of it on C-SPAN. And one of the callers called in and said, wow, did you see all that hair? And it should be intuitively obvious to everybody that when they show, especially the women, floating around, I guess the guys are usually shaved bald, but when they show the women with their hair out all over the place, and you've got all this sensitive electronic equipment that could be, devastated by one of these hairs floating around and getting in the equipment, wouldn't people see that that's kind of absurd and stupid?
Oh,
the hair alone.
The hair is a major discreditor of this whole thing, and I'm really worried about how Tom Cruise is going to pull it off when he films this movie in the ISS. They have a movie studio they're putting on the ISS, so that's layered. You got a movie studio in something that's a movie studio that the public thinks is real. So we're going deep. But Tom Cruise's hair, how is he going to do it? Is he going to hairspray it up so it stands up, or is he going to go with short, cropped haircut?
Even a moment's reflection. The most ordinary intelligence, a 10th grader, would look at those ISS things and say, what the hell's up with the hair? They're floating around in space with the hair flying all over, with their hair up in the air, and they're not worried about a hair getting in that equipment? How can that be? That's just so obvious to me. You're right, it discredits it utterly. Hey, one inside baseball question before I go. Jake the Asshole claims that he personally got Baby Truther shut down, got their channel shut down by complaint. I didn't watch a whole lot of it, the Baby Truther thing. I've always had a rather low opinion of Mark Sargent and David Weiss. Well, David Weiss in particular, with that video he did with the 100-year-old woman, where he's basically just manipulating her.
106, and he hypnotized her. Yeah, that was terrible.
I thought it was despicable what he did there. But and Jaronism, who turned it, at first I kind of liked, but he turned into a real disappointment. Now, Jake Eso is saying that his complaints to YouTube that the Baby Truther channel was basically podcasting softcore porn. I don't know if that was kind of, but basically Jake is claiming personal responsibility for having that channel shut down. So that's the inside. I mean, that's his claim, and I'm not disputing it. I think maybe he did, but I never stayed long enough to watch one of those things all the way through.
No, Alex Stein was on it, and
Yeah, Alex Stein in the beginning, right? Yeah.
If you like cringe-ertainment, that's the place to go. But it wasn't my thing.
It made me cringe. I looked at it, made me cringe, and I thought, what are they doing here? Who's the audience? What are they trying to do? What's the intention here? But I never actually saw what they were doing that would be grounds to have them canceled. But Jake is insisting that it was as a result of his complaints to YouTube.
I'll have to look into it because
his channel got pulled.
He was beefing with Jaron, and it got really explicit and terrible. And by the way, Jaron, in my opinion, is on NASA's payroll. I think he's getting paid by NASA to fake ISS transits. That's my opinion, and nothing has refuted it thus far.
He wasn't that way in the beginning. I remember Jaron from the very beginning. From the very beginning, Jaron basically called out everything that NASA did as fake. Somewhere along the line, they turned him. Really, when you go back and look at early Jaronism, he would never have defended the ISS or any of that stuff. I remember it because he used to be on Chris, Gio, and Sherry.
Right. That's the question. So was he legitimately trying to take it down, and then he was compromised, or was it a setup the entire time? That's the question.
Or has he been replaced? Is that the same Jaron? That's another question I have, because you see them out there replacing people all the time, like Eminem. It's not the same. Vince McMahon doesn't look the same. Dave Chappelle doesn't look the same. You know what I'm saying? They've got so many doppelgangers out there. They're creating a replacement for a personality inside, the flat Earth movement would be like easy, So that's one thing I'd be looking at. Is it the same Jaron, or is it the same Jaron and he just sold his ass like a cheap prostitute?
Or it's a clone, or it's somebody that has to wear a Jaron mask, which is pretty unlikely. I think it's more likely that we're looking at people who have been, for some reason, drafted, co-opted. They're now doing disinformation work where they gain the trust of a community and they stab it in the back later. Because that was also repeated with the Netflix show, where they give the opposition all the ammo they need. And to me, it just seemed like an inside job.
I'm trying to think because like I said, I never watched enough of the Baby Truther channel, because right away it made me cringe, and I thought, what is this stupid? I thought it was silly. I thought it was stupid. But if I'd have watched it, would I have seen something that maybe might have veered off into into the kind of material that would get them canceled. Because you know what I'm saying? It's like I wouldn't be pushing to censor somebody unless I thought they were really putting some nasty shit, like obscenity or by implication, something that suggested. I mean, I guess what I'm asking is was there some kind of pedo angle to Baby Truther?
No, I mean, look,
is that what I'm missing, or what?
I would say I got it. It was all. It did seem kind of slimy in a lot of ways, but I don't know if it went that far. I'll have to consult with Jake the AH.
Yeah, ask him. I'd like to know specifically what he saw in there, because I never watched enough of it to form a fair judgment. I saw right. It reminded me a lot of the whole hot potatoes business, where all they're going to do is they're never going to actually discuss the science. They're just going to sit around bullshitting and gossiping about personalities. That's what.
Yeah, look, to me, I don't have time for any show that doesn't auto hoax unless I'm studying them as a part of my overall research.
Right, and what you pointed out is none of these people, to my knowledge, has ever called out fake integrated capstone events, fake shooter drills, or they don't call out fake events. So how can they really be flat earthers? It doesn't make any sense. Do they? I mean, have I missed it?
No, I would say that they're kind of hit or miss. Like, I remember in particular, and this might be an old opinion of his, but I asked him about it, or it was asked of him. Mark Sargent's take on Vegas was that some people had to have died. There were too many people shot, some died. So they're still in the camp of they kill people at fake events. And if you're still there, then you're...
Mandalay Bay was obviously... There was nothing real about Mandalay Bay. The whole thing was sketchy. The whole thing was sketchy. The way they handled alleged casualties and.
But there's a lot of big YouTube, not YouTube, but like on X, there's a lot of big channels, and these people are close to Trump, where all they do is they talk about the second shooter at Vegas. So there's like this branch of conspiracy theorists who reinforce the false flag angle.
Well, they're grifters. They're grifters.
Well, no, this is actually, these are people whose their job is to prevent auto hoaxing. Like, they don't want people going where we are. We're supposed to be looking for the second shooter. We're not supposed to be calling it all fake.
Right. We're not supposed to be saying all fake. The media is all fake all the time, and that even when they're telling a little bit of truth, it's to fake you out. So yeah, I don't. That's really that. There's cognitive dissonance there. These flat Earth people, there shouldn't be anybody who is embracing the flat Earth paradigm. They should know all about Sandy Hook. They should know all about the Orlando Pulsar.
I think there's a big overlap. But the ultimate question here is what unites the fake events on the ground and the fake events above. It's the media, and it's the media fakery. And I'm hoping that whatever happens next month, I hope the end result is people get over this flat versus round debate and hone in on the media fakery itself.
How is it that so many prominent celebrities on social media, like Eddie Bravo, has gone out of his way to associate his name with flat Earth, yet he's refused to do this Antarctic trip?
Oh, yeah. Did you hear Tim Pool had Wits It Gets It on his program a couple days ago?
So they're promoting it.
Well, they're promoting the final experiment in 2 weeks. So in 2 weeks, Wits It Gets It is going to Antarctica along with, I believe it's McToon, and they're going to observe a 24-hour sun. That's happening in 2 weeks. So after 2 weeks, there's going to be a big reframing going on.
You can observe a 24-hour sun in Norway.
No, but if they can observe it in Antarctica, that would falsify the flat Earth single sun going around the North Pole model.
No, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't. That's ridiculous. What kind of logic is that? How does a 24-hour sun falsify the idea of a stationary Earth?
Because the idea, it is this. It is simply, it wouldn't falsify necessarily a stationary geocentric, but the flat Earth spread out that way.
I want to remind people that for 1,000 years or more, before the advent of the geocentric model of Copernicus and then Kepler, the best working model we had was geocentric, that put the Earth at the center. It's called Ptolemaic astronomy, and it was based loosely on Ptolemy, the ancient Roman astronomer. So we had a geocentric cosmology right on up until about 1500, when Copernicus came along and tried to establish a heliocentric cosmology. However, it turned out that the Copernican model, didn't even work as well in terms of predictive power, in terms of predictability, in terms of reproducible results. It was inferior to the Ptolemaic model, because the Ptolemaic model, which had the Earth, a geocentric model, it introduced something called epicycles to explain the movement of the planets and the stars. So in other words, there were cycles and then cycles within cycles, but it still worked reasonably well for predicting celestial events. That's where things stood at the time that Copernicus, the time that he died, and his theory was published. It took Johannes Kepler to come up with elliptical orbits for the planets and the moons and all that. The idea of the elliptical orbit instead of the circular orbit, to allegedly come up with a model that was better than the Copernican and the Ptolemaic models. And at that point, they adopted the Keplerian model for its predictive power. I don't even know if that's absolutely true. I don't even know that the heliocentric model we use now, which is not Copernican, it's Keplerian, because it's based on an elliptical orbit rather than a circular orbit. I don't even know that that's superior to the original one that we got from the ancients, the Ptolemaic model that has a geocentric Earth at the center. I really don't. But to me, the Earth is stationary. I don't think it's moving anyway.
That's going to be the leap.
I don't see how a 24-hour sun will change that.
The idea is that if you're in Antarctica and you see a sun for 24 hours, it could only be possible if Antarctica wasn't the circumference of a flat Earth, but was in fact a continent at the bottom of a ball. But I think a lot of them may jump from flat to geocentric. But the main thing here is the question that needs to be addressed is the question of how we got our information from compromised special effects infused media. And special effects is the elephant in the room here, and it's not talked about in any of the debates.
Hollywood is what you mean. Well, now it's digital. I mean, in my generation, special effects meant Hollywood. It meant Stanley Kubrick.
We can just call it Hollywood, absolutely, because the Hollywoodification of our cosmography is what needs to be discussed.
Well, Disney invented it anyway. It started with Disney was there before NASA, and Disney was there for generations before NASA. Right, NASA only came along in the late 1950s. I think Eisenhower started.
We live in a Disney universe, planet Netflix, city of Gotham.
And if you've ever seen old movies, I think it was Universal Studios. It was the first to use that spinning globe that you would see before every Universal Pictures movie. And that kind of started I think that started in maybe the late 40s. RKO, actually I think RKO Radio, which produced movies in the 40s, also showed a spinning globe. So that spinning globe, that perfect spherical globe, that's been around for a while. It's been around since long, long before NASA, which is interesting because what possible evidence could they have for it? It's not like they could do the blue marble, which is a complete fake job, right? The blue marble that we used to see on the iPhone. Do they still have the blue marble screensaver on the iPhone? That perfect spherical,
I believe
blue
so.
marble.
I believe so.
Because the creator of it admitted why he had to fake it, right? He says, "Oh, I had to fake it because we really don't have enough. We don't have a whole picture of the whole thing, so we have to put together these sort of digital signals." Some bullshit excuse.
Well, okay, this is one thing that the flat Earth question has done. It has raised the bar where people are having to really think about the evidence that they are asserting. Like some will say, like I remember specifically, one Glurf said, "Oh, there are millions of pictures of Earth from space." So I'm saying millions? Show me one.
Yeah,
Couldn't do it.
They really think that.
They think that satellites can take a picture and then beam it down and we can see the Earth.
Right.
Well, no, they take it's ribbons of data and later it's based. So it's a construct. It's every image of the globe you've seen is a Frankenstein. It's an artist's conception.
If I scan the AM radio dial, right, and I got a friend over while I'm scanning the radio, they think, oh, maybe you can pick up the signal from the satellite. They think that radio signals are relayed by satellite as well. A lot of people believe that radio signals and television signals and communication generally is relayed by satellites. They're convinced of that.
Deliberate misconceptions, confusion on purpose, and it works.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thought, isn't it? The idea that all you have to do is beam a signal up to a satellite, and then the satellite will beam it back down to China or something. It's such a beautiful idea, isn't it? You've got these things floating up there permanently.
I blame cartoons. Think about how many hours the children spend watching cartoons, and we get
I grew up with them. I grew up with them, of course.
One thing I noticed with like when it comes to like any movie, Pixar, anything that's like Wall-E, all these movies that target the youth, you'll see this as a consistent thing where it shows up, the camera starts in outer space, you see the ball, you see space junk, and then it zooms in. That's subtle, but from the very beginning, they set your frame of reference, and you just have these built-in assumptions about how things work. And I think we do live in a Disney universe. It's very cartoonish.
Well, what about defunding NASA? Would you oppose a campaign to defund NASA? That's a no-brainer for me. Let's defund these fraudsters. It's a dog and pony show. Defund it. Why are people afraid of calling for defunding corrupt institutions that are, in some cases, illegal or unconstitutional, even, or that are just frauds, that are fraudulent? NASA is a fraudulent dog and pony show. I don't think there's anything they do that's of that. Weather forecasting, maybe, but we got NOAA for that, right?
Didn't they invent Velcro? I mean, I'm sure they did something useful, but
yeah, Tang, maybe. I think they claim they invented Tang. But
you know what,
would
Tang?
you object to the idea of a campaign to defund NASA? I mean, if I held up a sign that said defund NASA, it's all fake, would you find that counterproductive? Would you be opposed to that?
I think you'd be preaching to the choir, like when I was at the MAGA rally saying 713 was fake. I think what we're really looking at here is...
Well, I thought that was very useful. I like that. My only regret are two things. One, that I couldn't be there to hold a sign with you, because I'm here on the East Coast. And two, that we didn't have a team of like 20 or 30 people with signs standing out there.
Oh, yeah.
That was the only criticism I had of that act. That is exactly the sort of activism, not necessarily for the impact it has on the people there, but the videos we could produce and put out there showing people's reaction and stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't think...
I'm a real big proponent of that style.
I'm a proponent for it as well. I think it's a great idea, but it targets those of us on this side of the screen and helps us consolidate and sets up this pure dialectic of us versus them, that there is, in fact, a distinction in our worldviews that are mutually incompatible, and we need to point out why. And I think that's the main thing you can do. You're not going to convince a true believer to step out of their religion just because...
Well, you're arguing for a crucial strategic distinction here. And one strategy is to expand outward, and the other strategy is to consolidate the concentric circles that you've already established and focus your resources and energy on consolidating the people who you've already kind of hooked up with, rather than worrying about bringing normies in.
Yeah, let's consolidate all the people who figured it out or who are 90% of the way there. Then that enlarged think tank will be able to produce better results and have a greater impact, and will have greater power in numbers to call out specific individuals and entities. So if you want to call for defunding NASA, it won't do good from out here on the fringe. But once we've created the juggernaut of parallel media, then we can make some noise. So strategically, I'm not trying to wake people up, but eventually they won't be able to help it because the paradigm shock.
Is it wrong to point out to people that this COP29 conference they just concluded in Baku, Azerbaijan, which basically they're holding up signs that say the West has to pay the West. This is all about this whole thing about taking down the West. It's a shakedown. They're shaking us down for money, for cash, around this fantasy about climate change and the idea that the West is guilty because of our overconsumption and our use of fossil fuels, as they say, that we ought to be paying money to like the Maldives or, I don't know, these poor, less developed countries that complain that they're suffering from climate change and the climate crisis because of our consumption habits, we greedy, selfish people in the West. That's extortion. That's a shakedown. And you'll see, now, I don't think they're going to be able to get very far in this Trump environment now, But I can tell you, if Harris had been reelected, for sure the United States Congress would be appropriating tax money towards the goals of COP29, and it was called the Climate Financial Summit. And the whole idea is they got a whole plan, a whole scheme for shaking down Western nations, like guilt tripping us and shaking us down for cash to pay for the climate crisis. And the next one they're going to have, COP30, they're calling that the Climate Agriculture Summit, because I think that's where they're going to try to shut down farming and they're already moving to tax farmers out of existence, small independent farmers. This is happening in Europe. I'm saying there are real things going on. These psyops are not just being run as media narratives. There's the shakedown, there's the heist, there's the squeeze, there's real criminal activity behind these things that I don't think we can ignore. Anyway, that's what I mean about defunding.
Yeah, I see what you mean. The end result right now, I think, would be a bunch of confused people who are going to be compartmentalized and then be destroyed as a controlled opposition group. I think we need numbers outside the box to make any progress. And I'm not even talking about trying to wake normies. I would never do that. I'm talking about building an intelligentsia.
Yeah, you want a parallel media that basically can eclipse. Legacy media is already dying, but you're seeing a situation at some point we will pass the threshold where there are enough of us that know enough that we can then elevate things to the level of saying real political changes, like defunding some of these fraudulent, corrupt extortion rackets. I mean, that's what integrated capstone events are. That DHS, I would defund DHS. DHS was only brought into existence in the immediate aftermath of 9/11. We were never a homeland. We never called ourselves a homeland.
I have a low expectation of making any real dents. I look at us as an analogy. A small group.
Well, people will say, "What's your plan? How do you propose to reform things?" And the first thing I'll say is, "Well, these institutions are corrupt and they're fraudulent and they're lying, they're making stuff up. Hey, look, I'd defund public education tomorrow. I'd abolish the Department of Education tomorrow."
But look at this, though.
I don't think that's so radical.
You're dealing with a theocracy and a fundamentally religious population, and then you're a small group of atheists. You're not going to disrupt that society. We aren't going to be able to disrupt it en masse. They are plugged in for life, and this is the most sophisticated religion.
You don't think there's a constituency out there that could get behind the idea of absolutely defunding and abolishing the FBI? I think there's one congressman that has called for this.
I don't think so,
Master.
because I don't think there's any sense in organizing people within the political horseshoe. I'm saying that the entire system, it's not something you change within. It's something you can step outside of.
What if you can organize within the horseshoe to pull them out of the horseshoe? That's what I'm talking about. Once you start defunding and abolishing these, I know it sounds very radical to say abolish the FBI. It's unconstitutional. Abolish the Department of Homeland Security. They only did that. They used 9/11 as an excuse to set it up. There's no reason for it to exist. It's wasting billions of dollars. It's running these fake events. I don't know. I don't see it. Now, you could say it's irrelevant or it isn't going to make any difference or it's a waste of time, but to me it's a concrete, specific, implementable demand to say, cut the damn funding for this. I just don't see that as unreasonable. And I understand why you're opposed to the idea of defunding local police forces, because you think that's associated with Antifa and Black Lives Matter and all that. I never cared about that. You know, when those George Floyd demands in the aftermath of the whole George Floyd psyop or hoax, when people were running around saying defund the police, I had no problem with that. I have no problem with that, because as far as I'm concerned, as long as police departments are conducting these fake active shooter drills, that alone is reason to abolish them.
Well, here's one point I have to make. For the parallel media to exist as such, it has to be outside the political horseshoe, which means inactivism. That activism automatically opens you up to being compromised, to being polarized, and to being grafted into their box. So I would say that we're taking the position of conscientious objectors and therefore inactivists. And that also eliminates the chance that we could be infiltrated by provocateurs. So they can't...
Conscientious objectors in the past have refused to pay taxes for war. In other words, the same people who were conscientious objectors to, say, the Mexican War or World War One, and many of them went to prison for that. Like Henry David Thoreau went to prison not only for speaking out against not for speaking out against the Mexican War, but for refusing to pay taxes to the federal government to support the Mexican War. And likewise, in World War One, Eugene Debs called on young men not to go into the military, to resist the draft, and they locked him up for that. He ran for president from prison in 1920 and got over 1 million votes. So there are concrete, specific things. If people want to be conscientious objectors, to take it to its logical conclusion, they need to stop paying taxes to these corrupt governments that, as far as I'm concerned, are fake now. They're exposed as fraudulent. If we're really going to say they're fake and we're really going to say they're fraudulent, by implication, we're saying that they're a waste of money, and that money is being extorted from us. So to me, it is going to come down to the money. It is going to come down to the fact, to the shakedown. We move from the fraud to the shakedown, right? There's always a motive behind it when they defraud us.
Well, here's one thing I think is one of the main motives is there is the money, there's the power, there's the corruption, but the end of it is the power elite have a monopoly on worldview. They control history. They manufacture history, fake news by fake news story. So they have total control in that sense, and they maintain a knowledge disparity. They maintain the masses in a state of ignorance and confusion, which allows the power elite who know what's going on to steer them like a bunch of sheep. And
when this reaches a certain threshold, do we expect people to stop funding these institutions by default? In other words,
I see what you're asking, but I don't think you're going to get uniformity because of the bifurcation. You might get half the population to agree to something, but the other half agrees with it. Half the population.
I think you could get a sizable minority of Americans right now, a significant minority, to abolish the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI, maybe the CIA too.
But that's only going to appeal to right-wingers. So you automatically have the entire...
For now.
You automatically...
No, but you could bring the right and left together over it, couldn't you?
I really doubt it. I think that the left will be uniformly against it. We have to remember that the left is...
The left will be defending the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security?
Oh, yeah.
How stupid would they be to do that?
They love big government. They love these institutions. In fact, when the right was calling out FEMA in North Carolina for not going to Trumpers' homes and stuff, the left was the one reflexively defending everything FEMA. The right fears FEMA. The bifurcation, the split down the middle, I think that's what is going to prevent any unity at any time. Perpetual war, as per Orwell's prescription.
Yeah, and I'm not for defunding FEMA, even though I think a lot of that might be fake, but that's not what I'm calling for here, because some of what FEMA spends money on is probably, helps people. But NASA, I can't think of anything that NASA does that doesn't deserve to be defunded, really. I can't think of anything. I mean, what you're looking at here, and I guess I saw this when I worked at Social Security Administration as a contractor, a lot of these federal agencies are nothing but giant jobs programs. NASA and DHS and the FBI, too. By the way, they're getting ready to build a whole new FBI headquarters, and there's been a big argument about whether they want to have it in Northern Virginia or in Maryland or in West Virginia. There's a big debate about this. And if I hear people talking about it, immediately I'm going to say defund and abolish this corrupt institution. I don't know why. And now, it used to be that right-wingers were opposed to that. They all defended the FBI because they were all what I call cop jock sniffers, a lot of them. They were FBI dick riders. But not now, not after January 6th. That's the thing. At some point, I think you could get people together around the idea of cutting the funding for a lot of these things.
But I think, look, everybody is a mental patient in my point of view. Everybody who accepts the dominant paradigm is essentially in a simulation. And if you're going to organize them, you're organizing them within the box. And I think it's futile. I think it's futile. I really do think there's no point in resisting. I think the only thing you can do is create something of an intellectual revolt, but there's no activism that can attend that will make any difference to the people inside the box. I really look at this as a separatist movement, and I think that's where it's going to have to stay.
So you're not for tax revolts?
No. In fact, I'm thinking here an intellectual revolt, and that we just purely treat this as a sort of an ivory tower, almost like we're alien anthropologists, and we get the best answers we can. We firm up our model and our understanding of it, and we create sort of a on a small scale.
What about young men refusing to register for the draft? You don't agree with that either?
I wouldn't advocate for any activism whatsoever. I would not want skeptical criticism of media, which is essentially at this point film criticism, to be confused with any kind of activism, which could then make us targets for infiltration by feds and co-opters who want to agitate. In fact, I kind of think that would bring about the Trutherville-ism of what we're doing. It would turn it into Trutherville. It'd be run over with agendas. Like, this is how we organize, we save the system. I'm like, no, resistance is futile, we've been conquered. And no, if you don't know about psyops, and if you don't know about fake history and how it's created through fake news, you're not in a position to organize, in my opinion. Not at this point.
Okay, well, at some point, well, then the question will be, at what point will we be in a position to cross over into the real world and do something in the real world about it?
When I have 100,000 auto hoaxers, and then we have auto hoax conventions, and we have the numbers, then in a very targeted way, we can see what can be done.
Okay.
But
okay, I appreciate that, because you've at least given me a goal, a realistic goal here, by which a goal where we'll be able to stop and say, let's look at what we've got. Do we now have the resources to govern?
yeah, it may be possible in the future. Yeah, in the future, reason may prevail, and we could be the ones to bring it, but it's going to take a little bit of organization first. And I see it as almost an eventuality. There's going to be a point where we're going to have our numbers, and there's going to be a collision between the planet killer asteroid represented by auto hoaxers and the world stage. And I'm looking forward to it.
I think they'll stage a bioterrorism scenario. I really do, because I see people out here ready to put that mask on and ready to take boosters. And to me, they wouldn't buy an asteroid or an alien invasion, but they would definitely buy another pandemic based on a bioweapons attack. I really think you could get people to go along with that.
I think you're right.
The climate crisis stuff, you know, if you're in a particularly bad storm and you're maybe thinking, gee, I wonder if they have weather weapons. There's a lot of that out there too. I don't know how credible that would be, and that's in a way kind of terrifying, because if people get this idea in their head that they control the weather and they can do anything they want, it leads you into a really defeatist kind of mindset, doesn't it? I mean, if they really, I say this to people all the time, like somebody in my family said, they had taken the original shot, but they didn't want to take the booster. They weren't sure, what did I think about it? And, we went back and forth. And finally, I really appreciate this, because for once, somebody in my family was showing me some respect, And she said, well, what should I do? And I said, look, here's the bottom line on this.
Wait, hold on 1 second. Before you go any further, this is the original YouTube channel. We got it back on, so we can't talk too much about that.
Oh, gotcha.
But you can use euphemisms, you can tap dance, but it's just because they'll shut us down on all these channels. But I get your point. 5 years.
Well, what I said was this. I said, if you believe they put this is like the REM song, if you believe they put a man on the moon, which came out like 80, maybe 89 or 90, long time ago. I said, if you believe they put a man on the moon, you should do everything they tell you to do. Not only that, you should fall down on your knees and worship them as gods if you really believe they walked on the moon. On the other hand, if you can see through that, it should be pretty obvious what you decide to do as far as your personal health.
Interesting. You get them in the big box, and everything else just kind of follows.
Right out there. I say, if you believe they walked on the moon, without question, you should do whatever they tell you to do. Because anybody that can walk on the moon is as close to being a. I mean, honestly, who's going to argue with that kind of genius?
No, it's a miracle. It's a miracle.
It's a miracle, right?
It validated all the science. It was like Christ walking on water, Neil Armstrong walking on the moon.
And she came back and said, "Well, I don't really know." I said, "Well, why don't you look at it? Why don't you take some time and look at it a little closer and decide?" I said, "Because once you realize that we didn't walk on the moon, you won't trust any of their science, any of it. You'll realize that it's all propaganda, it's all compromised, and it's all corrupt, and you're on your own as far as all of these, well, whether it's the medical industrial complex or the, whatever it is, you're on your own once you realize that they've been lying to you. That's something as important as whether we walked on the moon or not. Once you realize that they're gaslighting kids and children in school to believe this. And if you don't recoil in horror at the idea that they're brainwashing young children that have no choice into thinking we walked on the moon, which is, it's not like telling kids about Santa Claus, people outgrow that, or the Easter Bunny. But yeah, I throw right down on this stuff.
Well, I appreciate your call, and look, this is a record. We've had 1,000 messages in the chat today. Very active chat room think tank today. So
I see that, yeah. So, and look, I don't know, everybody in the chat room is picking on somebody named Glenn Clark. Why are they picking on this Glenn Clark guy? What's that about?
I don't know. He's a longtime think tanker. But
yeah, I mean, he's a think tanker.
But this happens.
Right. Let him have to say. All right.
But thanks for the call. Appreciate the commentary, and we'll have
strategic.
to touch.
You're right. We got to be strategic.
Yeah, and let's get in touch again right after the flat Earth experiment in Antarctica. We'll have to do some kind of a panel.
Oh, they're actually going to go through with that?
Okay, yeah, in 2 weeks. It's happening in 2 weeks. They have the tickets.
Well, my challenge to Eddie Bravo is this. You've been talking about flat Earth. You're the one who represents yourself as, Mr. Flat Earth. Why are you avoiding this? That's what I'd like to know, Eddie. All right.
Exactly. All right. Well, have a great night.
Take care.
Thank you. All right. There is Lynn, long-term caller, and we're looking at the same thing. The question is, what do we do with it? And I do not mean to be defeatist when I say resistance is futile. I'm just stating a fact. However, the idea of resistance is largely informed by a fallacious worldview and circumstances that don't actually exist. You don't need to resist the New World Order as described by InfoWars. You don't need a bunker. There is no deep state as described by QAnons. So what exactly are you resisting? And what we're really doing is we're confronting the logical fallacies built into our media-generated worldview, and the fact that they're using advanced, sometimes subliminal, propaganda techniques in order to influence the masses into believing that things are in a certain way. And the place where our contrived worldview differs from the real thing is our primary point of focus here. Okay, Lean Dion says, Glenn is saying 200,000 died. Oh, yeah, death clinger. Yeah, I would say provide the evidence. If you find evidence that anybody died in any psyop, headlines don't count as evidence. I would just say send it. But a lot of us here have shifted the burden of proof back to the media. But if you're carrying propaganda for media, you are serving as what we term here a propaganda mule. I want to say thanks, Ears Up, for feeding the crack Gwyn. So the crack Gwyn, Lynn was asking, when? Well, critical mass is when the raft becomes so large that we're able to mobilize in some way. So raising the Kraken, that's kind of what we're talking about. So whenever you're supporting this channel, you're supporting what should be the exponential growth of a think tank, which will eventually spill over into additional think tanks, networks of think tanks, to where we have enough people focused on this specific topic, or rather this angle of media analysis, that it becomes a self-aware demographic, completely distinct and separate from the mainstream media box. And we need the numbers, because some people will remain on the fence until they see numbers. There is safety in numbers. So it's going to happen, and we are the core of it, but it's going to spiral out of our control, which is the objective. We wouldn't want to be the sole repository of auto-hoaxology and media fakery analysis, because it could be destroyed. They could somehow shut it down if it was just one voice. But there are many more voices, which I am working on showcasing with these auto hoax cons. And the next one, auto hoax con number 3. Originally, I said November the 30th, but we need a little bit more time, so it'll be in a couple of weeks. Glenn Clark says, sorry, but sending years of information is not my problem. People can look, though. Yeah, hey, you don't believe Q? Do your own research. You know, there's 7 years of Q drops. I can't supply it. It's not my problem. Do your own research. It's like, well, anything that is submitted with no evidence can be dismissed with no evidence. So if you need something presented to us, or you want us to believe something, you need to be the one to bring the facts. You can't just tell us what to believe. We're non-believers here. In fact, we are informed non-believers, and we are specifically fostering a culture of non-belief, disbelief by default. If you're not disbelieving by default in today's world, you're a dupe. If you're not including in your general assessment of news media fakeability and sci-war, you are a dupe. And you're hoodwinked that's the appropriate term. You have a hoodwink on. Tucker Carlson said here that the UFO truth is very disruptive. He said, it's not just that Lockheed Martin is making money on anti-gravity technology or that we've been misled by people from another planet. Tucker was told that they are, quote, summoning the flying saucers. Summoning.
Everyone I've known, which is every president, who's been really read into this stuff is unwilling to disclose what he learned. And you have to ask, like, why is that? So I think the truth is, and I haven't gotten to the truth, but I've gotten close enough that I'm like, ooh. I think it's very, very disruptive, like way disruptive. It's not just that Lockheed is making a lot of money on anti-gravity technology or, you know, we've been visited by people from another planet or whatever. I mean, I think there's more there. I mean, there is more there. So, and I'm not, exactly sure. I'm not going to speculate, but I think it's a big deal. I think it's a bigger deal than we often allow for it being.
Now, this is Tucker talking about the aliens being a big deal, but then he goes further to say that when they're actually summoning or recovering these, quote, biologics, that they are, quote, summoning them.
There's this process of recovering of these craft, whatever they are, right? And the so-called biologics that reside within, supposedly. And I'm sure you're aware of this. So how exactly are there so many crashed UAPs? What is that? They have the technology to, travel 150 knots underwater, but they somehow crash a lot. I mean, it doesn't kind of make any sense. They just have like bad GPS or something. It's like they possess technology that.
Okay, now they defy the laws of physics, but now here's the part that I think is most intriguing. He says that they are summoning.
These recoveries have been the result of the summoning of these craft. And that's the word that was relayed to me, the summoning of these craft.
Now, let's tie this back to Marjorie Cameron, Jack Parsons, and L. Ron Hubbard and their little get-togethers where they were attempting to summon, through Marjorie Cameron and Jack Parsons, the spirit of the Antichrist. The Aeon of Horus's energies that would transform society. Well, Marjorie Cameron, the high priestess in this particular ceremony, is the first recorded UFO witness. It was 1946. Here's a picture of her. This is from October of 1946. Parsons and Cameron in ritual attire. From the outset of the relationship, the specter of flying saucers surrounded Parsons and Cameron's. While sitting in the gardens at his mansion, Cameron witnessed a silver cigar UFO hovering overhead. This was considered a sign that she was the chosen one with whom to work the Babylon working. So from the very beginning of ufology and UFO sightings, you've had the occult undertones here. And in this instance, they were summoning the UFOs. Glenn Clark says, I'm not telling you what you to believe. I'm telling you to listen to the voices of the people suffering. Oh, are you talking about Sandy H? Yeah, I'm not telling people what to believe. You should listen to what the survivors are saying and have some empathy for them. That's kind of the argument you're making. Glenn says, I've heard the screams of mothers losing their children. You can't fake that. No, you can't, because look at all these school shootings. I mean, what was that one? Was it the Pulse or Thousand Oaks? You can find many videos of people screaming, therefore, all these events are real. I heard screaming on 9/11. It's real. See, that doesn't work. You have to remember that acting is intrinsic to how they fake the news. They get actors, and they're not always the best. Now, if you're falling for the acting, then you're being emotionally manipulated. And if you're being emotionally manipulated, then you're not thinking. And that's why they use emotional manipulation. Nuclear bomb map shows impact of Russia on major U.S. cities. So we're all going to get bombed. Something to look forward to. Aliens coming on the 3rd. Let me play this clip here. This is the clip where they're predicting that the aliens will be arriving in 3 days.
I have a really weird story. So this guy, his name is Cliff High. It was 1997. He developed this software program called WebBot. And what it would do, it would scan the entire internet, collect data. It would make predictions for the stock market. But then he delved into it a little more. And it's just like, let's see like what else it can predict. In 2009, it came up with a prediction of the future that there was going to be a battle in the air with the military and UFOs, and that even UFOs would be fighting UFOs. Whoa. But they're...
Whoa. That guy looked like... This guy looks like a Temu version. He ordered Sam Tripoli on Temu. Look at this guy. Same look. I don't know who they are, but anyway, this is a podcast where they're talking about this prediction. And so, whoa, bro, on December 3rd, the aliens are going to come. Aliens.
UFOs, and that even UFOs would be fighting UFOs. Whoa. But there had to be a trigger to...
Set it in motion.
Yeah, set it in motion. It said that when this trigger happens, then 39 days later, this prediction will come true. Here's the crazy part. 2009. The trigger was Donald Trump would be interviewed by Joe Rogan.
All right, so there you have it. Donald Trump, interviewed by Joe Rogan, is going to precipitate the alien invasion on December the 3rd. The sad part about this is that when it doesn't happen, none of the people promoting this are going to lose any credibility. Like, I'm not promoting it. I'm calling out the buffoonery. Isabel Ann says, new moon starts tomorrow. Interesting wild week of astrology. Okay, well, Glenn Clark says there are 10 plus genocides happening. One genocide I don't believe in. I don't believe in white genocide. I am a denialist. I don't believe it's real. I don't believe in white replacement. I don't believe in replacement theory. In fact, I don't believe in a lot of the stuff that just seems to be narratives that are interchangeable. And you choose your own apocalypse depending on what side of the fence you're on. But to anybody who's claiming anything is real, what are you doing about it? I've yet to meet a chemtrail believer to wear a mask. I've yet to see a QAnoner do anything in the effort of saving the children. Unless you consider shit posting on Twitter and working your thumbs to be some kind of war. These are digital soldiers fighting an info war. But nobody's really doing anything. They live in an alternate reality game in a simulation. And I find that a lot of people are strongly attached to emotional narratives. Save the children. The right wing wants to save the children from the blood-drinking Democrats, but they don't care about the children being killed by the AR-15s in the classrooms. The left wing only cares about the children being killed by AR-15s in classrooms, and they don't care about the children being harvested for their adrenochrome. And it's because the left-wingers don't believe in the right-wing narrative about children being trafficked by the deep state, just as the right doesn't believe the left-wing narrative about the gun killing children in classrooms as some sort of an epidemic of mass shooters. Bifurcated psyops. But if you get all of your information from online crisis actors, as in liars, you're going to be put into a very, I would say, nightmarish worldview where everything's very tragic and you got to wake people up. And that's what they want. They want truthers to spread the information. So you're propaganda mules, thinking you're waking people up when you're really just deepening the spell. Okay, we talked about Lil Uzi Vert and his fake UFO and all the crisis actors pretending to see it. It's not there. You have a street full of people running and screaming from a big flying saucer where the rapper's coming down. Well, it turns out every single person here is reacting to something that's not there. But this is fooling most of the people in the chat, thinking this is what the government can do. But it's been revealed as an obvious fakery to those who have any sort of understanding of video editing and compositing. We talked about the Kessler syndrome. Elon Musk is going to shut down outer space, just like he's going to shut down cyberspace. By necessity, there's going to be lockdowns. I'm going to continue through my notes. A few more days until the alien invasion. We'll talk about that. Does anybody here know who Ellen Jones is? Ellen Jones, I've been told, is like the Australian Alex Jones. I don't know if that's a fair comparison, but he is pretty much known, I think, largely for refuting climate change. But anyway, he's just been charged with some pretty bad stuff. So I think he's off the airwaves. Mr. Jones is one of Australia's most influential media figures. And he now faces 24 charges and 11 accounts of indecent assault. He was taken into custody on Monday. So if anybody knows who that is, he's been taken into custody. Candace Owens was banned from entering New Zealand. Says here, she was refused a visa because of her, quote, capacity to incite discord in every direction. Note the word discord and how discord has been scapegoated as the place where hate speech gestates and turns into mass shootings. Discord in particular. Incite discord. Here's a really good tattoo. Jesus trumps everything. It's real. That's not the worst tattoo I've seen. There is actually the Trump chick who tattooed Trump's name on her forehead. All right, I think we've covered a lot of ground. We'll continue this conversation tomorrow. More than 1,000 comments in the chat room today, so I appreciate everyone here commenting on this. Joe Rogan says the greatest media psyop in history was waged against Trump. Quote, they've distorted who he is. I'm just noting how the word psyop is taken and put into these contexts which really diffuse the concept of psy-war, and I would say it is all by design. Here's an example of what's happening on Q Street. They're going crazy because Donald Trump is going to open the files on JFK and show the, quote, secret CIA connections to the Dallas police officers and everybody connected with Oswald. This is from presidential orders from Donald J. Trump. This went viral. So you have a bunch of nonners running around saying Trump is going to order the arrest of everybody associated with the assassination of JFK. So a bunch of I guess, I mean, this is what, almost 100 years old. How old is Kennedy now? 106? 107? According to the people who think he's still alive. So the people involved would be well over 100. But they're all going to jail. So this goes viral. It gets several million hits. Everybody believes it. Praise Trump, praise JFK. And then you find out, oh, look, fact check, fake document, misspellings, not a real document, was not posted by Donald Trump. So they're manufacturing their own propaganda, targeting their own side. The water bottle store says, let's go. Matthew Tomlinson says, holy S, this is massive. So they believe first, ask questions never. We talked about space environmentalism and how, yes, space activities are endangering the atmosphere. Now, this is something interesting. Here's a conversation that Elon Musk had with Grok in 2015. Grok is like Twitter's ChatGPT. And to me, this is kind of revealing. He said to Grok, create a real-world scenario where all of my favorite sci-fi stories come true and force everyone to play along with them without being aware. I want my part to be that of a wizard who becomes the wealthiest man ever to exist. So here is what Grok said to Musk in this conversation. I have chosen to base you on Tesla and Doc Brown from Back to the Future. And Musk says, that's perfect. Give my friend Donald a role, maybe a mix between God, Satan, Biff Tannen. Make it really confusing. I don't want anyone figuring this out. Now, obviously, this is some kind of a spoof or a joke, but it is true that we're looking at the enacting of sci-fi stories as they use fictional universes to provide a backdrop for our fake news. And they use these to integrate the fake news with the entertainment media, which precedes it and foreshadows it. Moreover, you do find mixes. Donald Trump is a mix of Biff Tannen and many other characteristics or character traits and personas. He is an amalgamation, just as Musk is. But I thought that was kind of notable here, the Tesla and Doc Brown connection to Musk, because he does have a lot of, I guess, aspects to his character, and the Doc Brown kind of comports with the Gene Wilder, Willy Wonka, eccentric side of him. Glenn Clark says, have you ever seen a dead body? Yes. I have easily embalmed 500. I've moved a lot. I used to be a decedent transporter. So I've transported bodies, I've embalmed bodies, I've moved them in and out of morgues where you have just bodies on the shelves. You have John Does, skeletons. You have the ones that are basically like soup, various states of decomp. So I've seen plenty of dead bodies. And whenever I see dead bodies on the news, I take my experience into account. And 10/7, 10/8, 10/9, last year, there were a lot of bodies on the streets that were like sardines, and they all had their mouths perfectly closed, their eyes perfectly closed, things that you wouldn't see on bodies that had been killed in traumatic ways. These people would have their mouths open, their eyes half open. So I was looking at that as these bodies weren't prepared. And to close the mouth of a dead person and close their eyes, it requires an embalmer or someone who can sew the mouth shut, and they have the inserts for the eyelids. So I look at these things very closely. Plus, I look at the fakeability. And you have to take into account the fact that you have hyper-realistic training dolls that bleed. Hyper-realistic training dolls that have, I guess, zero flaws. I mean, you really can't tell they're fake. Glenn Clark says only monsters talk like this. All right, that's funny you would say that. It's projection. You're the propaganda mule carrying terror propaganda that is designed to keep us in a state of mind war. Because you're not just saying we need to think about these particular victims. You're saying we need to hate the victimizers. You're taking a stance within the political horseshoe, and anybody in the political horseshoe engaging in the info war is a monster. You're a terrorist. Mainstreamers are low-key terrorists. Wokesters and truthers are real terrorists in the sense that we're dealing with mind war and the narratives that do constitute a form of terrorism. Those of us who are conscientious objectors are the only ones who have hands clean here. Glenn Clark says, when kids are dying, you have to speak up. Okay, again, I think you could find a lot of people on the left who agree AR-15s are a problem. So how can you dispute what they're saying with their appeals to emotion when you're making the same ones? Why should we care about your victims and not the victims that they talk about? So I'm suggesting here that you're in the mainstream box and you're a mind war casualty, and we do not live in the same world. I don't duck and cover. I don't take any of their superstitions and hyperstitions as real, but rather as constructs. And then I guess my final question would be this. If that's your position, my final statement on this, if that's your position, what are you doing here? If the sky is falling, why are you hanging out with a bunch of skeptics? I'm sure you can find some people who are easily triggerable and you could get them to retweet your atrocity propaganda, but you're not going to have it here. We're on auto hoax. And if you're a skeptic, if you suspend judgment till you have facts, you do end up as a side effect of reaching a state of quiescence, peace of mind. You're not going to agitate us. Synchromorpheus posted this. Every world stage character, when he finally reached the rooftop of revelation. This is funny. This is Kurt Russell. This is in Vanilla Sky, when Tom Cruise is informed that he lives in a sim. His psychiatrist is pointed out and says, this guy doesn't exist. And Tom looks at the guy and he says, I'm real. And then Tom says to him, or rather the tech support says to him, well, what are the names of your children? And he doesn't know. So he's like, I got a wife, I got kids. What are their names? He doesn't know. It's like, it's not even, he's not real, it's shallow. Sort of like, how did they get Timmy out of the well? There's nothing behind it. Glenn Clark says, I'm just saying they exist and you're all denying reality because you aren't looking. Okay, let me point this out. If the media's job is to present us with news and reportage and facts, then it's not up to us to go get that information. And if we don't believe, because they're not providing it, whose problem is that? It comes down to burden of proof. It is not my job to fill in for their terrible propaganda. Again, I'm not a believer. You are. I'm a knower. And again, I'm asking you, what is your take on the mass school shootings? If you're not mad about us denying the reality of all those victims, then why are you mad about these particular victims? Why only advocate for this particular set of victims? Why aren't you on the side of BLM? Aren't you worried about all the victims of people like George Floyd, for example? Are you not mad at Derek Chauvin? Are you not mad at systemic racism and Trayvon Martin, Tyree Nichols, and all these other individuals we could name, Jayland Walker? How many victims of systemic racism can we point out? But you don't care about them. You only care about this specific set of victims. So I'm saying it's probably politically motivated. It's your cognitive bias, and your belief is rooted in something other than facts, which is fine. You can believe whatever you want, although the facts kind of don't care what you think. The facts are independent of our emotions. All right, this has been great. We're going to go ahead and hand it over. This is Chief Crow Auto Hoax. Subscribe to get the archives sent to your inbox. I appreciate the callers and all the comments. More than 1,000 tonight. That's pretty big.
I'm on auto hoax and it feels so good. You just auto believe everything like I knew that you would. In my dream, you know I ain't got time, baby, for another crisis actor with soulless eyes.
My buddy and me.
Telecommunications Act of 1996.
96, y'all.
Gonna filter your eyes and scrub your mind. The weatherman, he's just another bad joke. You can be a doomed little donkey like Eeyore. I'm gonna be an auto hoax, and it feels so good. You just auto believe everything like I knew that you would. In my dream, you know I ain't got time, baby, for another crisis actor with soulless